We are back from our recess. It is 6:50 p.m. and we will now call to order our work session meeting. I am Missy Bender. Y'all have heard this before. Some of you who were here earlier, sorry, I have to repeat it. I'm Missy Bender, President of Plano ISD Board of Trustees. Noting that a quorum is present, I call this work session meeting of the Plano ISD Board of Trustees to order at 6:50 p.m. on August 21, 2018, in the Plano ISD Administration Building. On the board's behalf, I wish to extend a warm welcome to all who are present and to our web and video viewers. For those of you who were not here for the earlier special called meeting, let me introduce my fellow trustees and staff. Seated to my left are Sarah Bonser, Superintendent of Schools, Dr. Teresa Williams, Chief Operating Officer, Nancy Humphrey, Board Secretary, and Trustee Tammy Richards. Seated to my right, although invisible right now, he will be back in an hour, Board Vice President Dr. Yoram Solomon, Trustee David Stolley, Trustee Jerry Chambers, Trustee Angela Powell, and Executive Assistant to the Superintendent and Board of Trustees, Sharon Nowak. Ms. Bonser, will you verify that we are in compliance with the provisions of the Texas Open Meetings Act regarding the notice for this meeting?
Thank you, President Bender. Yes, this meeting has been posted in compliance with the provisions of the Texas Open Meetings Act.
The board does not have any discussions or matters for the purposes authorized by the Texas Open Meetings Act, Texas Government Code Section 551.001 during this meeting. Therefore, the board will not adjourn to closed session tonight. So we will just dive right in to the work session. And item A1 is going to be about the school opening update. But before we get to that, let me just remind you that we conduct our meeting focusing on the district's two major ongoing goals: ensure continued improvement in student learning and ensure efficient use of financial resources and budgeting. Our first report this evening ensures continued improvement in student learning, and it's the school opening update. Ms. Bonser.
Thank you, President Bender. It's my pleasure to announce that school opened on Monday of last week. We're already 1 week and 1 day into the school year, and we welcomed about 52,400 students to Plano ISD. We were one of the earliest districts to start in the area and probably in the state, and so we anticipate over the next several weeks that number coming up a little bit more. So we'll continue to keep the board and everyone posted on student enrollment information. This year we also welcomed 450 teachers new to the district and into the fold of Plano ISD educational professionals, and they had an opportunity to receive professional learning and onboarding with their campus and district team, and so we're excited to have them in front of the kids this week and helping get the school year started. I also want to give a brief update on some of the construction projects that we undertook during the short summer. And happy to note that all of the projects that needed to be completed in time for school to open back up were completed. And so it was a little down to the wire in a couple of cases, but we made it. And I want to give just a couple of special thanks in that regard because I feel like there are some folks that deserve some recognition in their efforts to get the school year started. First of all, there were a lot of staff and parents who put in extra time, especially the weekend before school started. And so to Randy McDowell and his team, Juan Ramos and Tony Pearson and all of the facilities, maintenance and staff, they went over and above at all of the schools that had projects going on. They worked through the night, they called in extra crews. Randy was pushing a broom, Dan and Carrie were moving boxes, Susan was delivering Sonic drinks. Literally, there was no person that was not involved in being a part of the team that prepared our schools to open the doors on Monday morning to a school that was inviting and welcoming and ready for kids. And that's pretty amazing. I think there are pictures of all of that somewhere around. Also, I'd like to thank the principals and teachers and staff who worked also tirelessly in the evenings, during the days. Shout out to Miller Elementary staff who were not able to get into their building until a little bit later than, a day or two later than we had thought. And so they really came through with a smile and a positive attitude. The other thing I think sometimes we don't realize is that as we were going around the district to the different sites that had projects going on, but the number of families that are in there helping the teachers. And I can't even tell you the number of teachers whose children, spouses, parents, grandparents were in those rooms helping them get ready for school to start. And so sometimes we don't realize it's not just the staff, but their families that are contributing as well. And that means a lot to all of us, and so we're very thankful for that. The fire marshal, who made a Sunday visit to Robinson Middle School to make sure that we could open the doors safely to our students. So, you know, he came through, and while all of us may have been sleeping in on Sunday morning, he was out at the campus trying to help us get school started on time. And then finally, you know, we kicked off Mission Plano ISD, and that was an effort to get all of the people who support the campuses out to the campuses. And I will tell you, there were more red shirts. The Red Shirt Brigade is what we have been titled, out in schools in any way that they could, contributing to supporting teachers and staff. And I want to take a moment just to read a couple of comments from staff that was completely unsolicited. This was the response from teachers and principals in our district. So a Bethany Elementary teacher stated, "I just wanted to send you a quick note to say thank you for the help of our red shirt friends on this Meet the Teacher Day. The extra hands were greatly appreciated and the words of encouragement were priceless." From an elementary principal, "I want to drop you a quick note of thanks for the incredible folks you shared with us on Friday. All of these folks provided an incredible service, from providing training on Go Guardian to unpacking and sorting kindergarten supplies, helping create a bulletin board, and so much more. Many teachers commented on how nice it was to have so much support. One teacher in particular came into my office with tears of gratitude to share how impactful it was to have folks from the administration building willing to help with even the most menial tasks that allowed her to focus on making the first day of school special to her students." And finally, from one of our senior high campuses, from the counseling team, "I can't thank you enough for all of your wonderful helpers that you sent to the different campuses last Friday. One of your sweet ladies helped me in the file room with all of the withdrawn folders that we get from Vines and Clark during the summer. I was working on the folders, but with her help, we got them all done and in place, and I felt like a new person at the end of the day." Surely this collaborative effort at the start of the year sets the tone for our district and for the culture that we are all committed to the success of one another, and our actions were heard louder than our words that week. Your success is our mission, and we are excited to keep this going all year long. Finally, this past week, TEA published District A through F ratings. I would be remiss if I skipped the opportunity as superintendent to say just a few words about that. While the district has many things to celebrate, student achievement being first and foremost, our board adopted a resolution several years ago opposing this type of rating system for a variety of reasons. That one letter grade could in any way explain the complexity of schooling in its entirety is ridiculous. As superintendent, my fear would be that a letter grade masks the real story of what the data tells us about student achievement. Mainly that there are areas that we are clearly strong, but there are areas where we must continue to improve. We must not get lost in the label, the work that stands behind the letter grade that remains to be done. Namely, to live up to the goal set by this board, to ensure continuous improvement in student learning. So we will take a moment to celebrate the achievements of our students, and then we will buckle down and get back to work to better meet the needs of all of our students to maximize their potential and their success in student achievement. Finally, on a much lighter note, I'll bring us back to cap off this back to school report with a brief video put together by our amazing communications team that recaps that the start of school is a time of hope and everyone can simply enjoy the enthusiasm and excitement that a new school year brings with all of our hopes and dreams for the kids and the teachers in our schools. Your success is our mission. Your success is my mission. Welcome to the 2018-2019 school year. I could not be more proud to represent you as your superintendent. Welcome home.
The most amazing experience today. We are unpacking and getting ready for a new school year, and we have so many people from the district offices and all the district buildings who've come out to help us, and it's been absolutely amazing today, so we really appreciate it.
Exciting beginning to the year, for sure. And we're going to continue that commitment to support those districts, the campuses from a district level, and I look forward to doing that myself at my campus, but I'm assigned to. Our next two reports ensure governance and administrative support of the district goals. And the first item related to that is for information purposes. We have some board subcommittees that we use, sometimes on a standing basis, sometimes on an ad hoc basis. The three before you right now, the Board Advisory Goal Setting Committee, the Board Audit Committee, and Legislative Committee. These are standing committees. And I've received your input and what your interests are. So for the Board Advisory, Jerry Chambers and I and Angela Powell will be working on that together. So we'll work with staff to determine an appropriate board goal for the 5 board advisory committees. The Board Audit Committee will consist of Nancy Humphrey, Yoram Solomon, and David Stolley. And amongst the three of you, would you figure out who you want to tag to be sort of the organizer of those meetings and so forth? So,
I nominate Nancy.
Okay, so
I don't know anything about accounting.
yeah, just you know what to do.
I will.
Schedule meetings and
Absolutely.
so forth.
I'll take that on.
And then the last one is the legislative, that will remain to be myself, David Stolley, and Nancy Humphrey. So as we go forward, we may have other opportunities for other ad hoc committees, and we'll establish those as needed. All right, second item, and this is for information only, and this is the only other item, I believe, that we have on our agenda. So it is related to early childhood, specifically pre-kindergarten. As a result of discussion during the agenda item for early childhood school number 4, construction manager at risk, guaranteed maximum price at the June 12, 2018 board meeting, additional information was requested and is being presented regarding the district's early childhood pre-kindergarten program. Ms. Bonser, would you please start us off?
Sure. I'm happy to. Thank you, President Bender. Following the June board meeting agenda item regarding early childhood 4, the board requested administration to bring back information related to pre-K as it relates to the new facility. I'd like to first say that the administration supports pre-K and the continued expansion of the pre-K program. We know that quality pre-K offered in our district levels the playing field in our youngest learners, whether they are special education, English language learners, economically disadvantaged student, or really any other early student without any kind of designation. Kindergarten ready is a key component in setting the stage for successful academic, and we want as many students participating as we possibly can afford to accommodate. While the research presented later this evening will show Plano ISD's kindergarten readiness based on pre-K attendance by half-day or full-day enrollment, the evidence from our own students shows that quality pre-K programming offered by this district is preparing our youngest learners to be kindergarten ready and leveling the playing field for students as they enter their academic careers in our district. I don't have a clicker. Okay.
Sarah, if I may ask a favor, I thought there were 2 slides that actually were at the end of the presentation that might help set some really good context if we look at them earlier. That was slide 38 and 39. Can anyone with the clicker get to those 2 slides?
My pages are not numbered, my slides are not numbered.
That one. Oh, just one
The
back.
summary?
No,
It's the map.
the maps. I think anyone who doesn't know Plano very well would be surprised that any of these ED numbers are high. But I think it's been our sort of shared community knowledge that the poverty is all on the east side. So you look at 47% economically disadvantaged, 11% mobility, and that's striking and challenging. But when you flip to the next slide, and you, on the west side, take off the Jasper feeder, which has almost no apartments to speak of, you're left with the southwest quadrant where the poverty and the mobility are even more than what you find on the east side, where we have the majority of our amazing resources like Head Start, Plano Family Literacy. So I think just looking at this gives context to the conversation about where in the district help is dramatically needed.
Thank you, Tammy. So a little bit of, to start us out, just a little bit of history of how we got here. And Tammy raises a good point of kind of showing the graphic of the district maps. But in preparing for this evening's discussion, we actually went back to look historically in board documents of how did the artifacts and documents show the unfolding of early childhood school information based on direction the board has set along the way. To that end, what you see on this slide are taken from the board's elementary call to action for focused learner support from October 2016. I know it's very small, but I'm going to read it aloud. In this call to action, you see the set of top boxes. In the orange box, it says number 1, one dimension of learning readiness is participation in robust early learning experiences prior to the start of kindergarten. Continue to expand full-day pre-K opportunities for economically disadvantaged students in Plano, specifically gauging the need for the construction of the 4th early childhood school. The second is in the blue box. It says poverty combined with high mobility rates present a distinct challenge in our ability to address the diverse learning needs of students. Deeply explore and investigate programs, treatments, interventions, services, etc., which will directly target these factors and develop unique systems to respond to and counteract these impediments to academic success. And finally, in the green box, number 3, this confluence of factors, as stated above, has created schools which have a unique enrollment profile. This dynamic is currently more prevalent in the southwest quadrant of the district. Investigate a magnet approach that creates a distinct learning environment around a common theme and framework The first school to look at in more detail for this is Huffman Elementary. And I say that to kind of break tonight's presentation into the pieces that we'll look at, because we won't look at all three of those things this evening. So what the administration has done is we've said this evening, based on the previous board meetings conversation on early childhood 4, we will focus tonight on early childhood. The magnet concept was started at Huffman and is the elementary IB-PYP program. It is in its second year of candidacy, and we hope that that campus will earn its distinction this year and be certified as an elementary IB-PYP magnet. Certainly we can bring more information back to the board about that magnet approach at a future date. And finally, the idea that the district explore what we might define overall as wraparound services is critically important to this district. The district is convening a task force this year to look district-wide at the current services provided east to west, west to east, to dig deeply into the needs across the district and seek partners and determine what we need to put in place in order to provide needed services to our families, in addition to any services that might already be provided. As this work progresses, we will bring information and recommendations back to the board about this task force and the work to be done as we consider the entirety of wraparound services. There are really two segments to today's information. One is the first part of 4 pieces of information regarding the current and future thoughts about pre-K. So we'll talk about what does the research and data tell us about the impact of pre-K on kindergarten readiness? What is our current pre-K programming? Who do we serve? Where do we serve them? And how does that look? The third part is what is our enrollment and capacity in the current system? How have we expanded pre-K opportunities in the time that we have offered full day? And especially for those students who are economically disadvantaged. In part 4, what are the options for future expansion? And in that piece, it includes the facility conversation around how can we continue to accommodate expanding full day pre-K, either in current sites or with construction. So we'll talk about all of that. Throughout the presentation, we will reference several handouts that were part of the electronic board book packet. However, for your ease of use, we have also provided a hard copy for the board at the board table so that you can easily access them as the handouts are referenced throughout the evening. You will also hear from a variety of staff members and administration this evening. The reason for that is when we discuss early childhood services, this touches almost all departments. We want everyone who's involved in this process to be able to talk about their role and responsibility in early childhood education and facilities. The second part of the program this evening, we hope, will encourage discussion, and throughout the presentation, of course, but really some discussion from the board that allows us the opportunity to listen carefully to your thoughts and ideas regarding pre-K and direction for the program today and in the future. At this time, unless there's any other questions for me, I'd like to turn the presentation over to Dr. Hasley to begin the first part, which is what does the research and data tell us about the impact of pre-K on kindergarten readiness?
Thank you, Ms. Bonser. Of course, that question was an easy one because there is a lot of research out there that shows the benefits of pre-K. Sorry, thank you. Especially for students who are learning a second language or also students who are from economically disadvantaged homes. But as with all educational research, it's difficult to isolate one treatment and make conclusive assumptions about it unless you are really studying closely your own program. So when we consider all the other factors, for example, if you're following a pre-K student all the way into 3rd grade and then measuring their 3rd grade reading assessment scores, a lot of factors happen in between pre-K and 3rd grade. So all of that to say is that we do look closely at all of our programs and in the years in between and the instructional practices. Okay. So I have one bit of research on the slide here, as you can see, from Texas Education Agency and their study published in 2017. Of course, it shows that kindergartners pre-K students have better kindergarten readiness at a 16% higher rate, according to their study. They also went on to look at third grade reading scores and also on to likelihood of enrolling in college. That was a very comprehensive study. We also we looked at several other research studies, and the board heard from the commit group earlier this year, or in June, I guess. And they shared with us their work with Dallas ISD, reporting on a 4-year-old program, and said that students who attend pre-K are 2 times more likely to be ready for kindergarten, according to their reading assessment. And the students who are ready for kindergarten are 3 times more likely to read proficiently in 3rd grade. Another study we looked at was the Vanderbilt Study, mostly about Tennessee, but they did include some Texas research there. And again, pre-K in Texas shows that students who attend pre-K are more prepared for kindergarten compared to their peers, and that the benefits last through 3rd grade and beyond. So there are lots of studies, as I mentioned, that agree with this assumption that pre-K levels the playing field, as Ms. Bonser said, and helps students be prepared for kindergarten. Our own research supports the linkage between pre-K participation and all of our programs, whether we're looking at the half-day program, Head Start program, which is a full day, or the full day that we have on the elementary campuses. We know that we not only look at academic readiness, but also social and emotional readiness. That's a big part of our pre-K programming. So when we ask the question, did our pre-K program prepare our economically disadvantaged students for kindergarten? Well, the data, as you can see here, shows yes, on average, our economically disadvantaged pre-K students were kindergarten ready, as shown on their beginning of the year MAP testing in kindergarten. So this is a cohort we followed who were in pre-K in 16-17 and kindergarten in 17-18, and this was their beginning of the year kindergarten reading and math assessments. The orange line across at level 40 is what MAP considers to be kindergarten ready. So you can see our average of our students who were tested came in kindergarten ready. So the purpose of this part of the presentation was really to review some of the research, which we all believe that pre-K has benefits beyond the year of pre-K, especially on economically disadvantaged students. And when we look at our own data in Plano ISD, while we only have 1 year of a cohort to look at so far, and we're beginning our own longitudinal study, it's already showing that yes, our pre-K is making a difference in preparing those students for kindergarten. So we will continue to expand the type of data that we collect on students, both in pre-K and also as they progress through the years, and we want to have our own study through the years and follow those students and their success. So now the next piece will be shared by Susanna Spina, and Susanna is our early childhood director who has played a critical role in developing this presentation. We appreciate her work. So she'll take us through the next part, which is about our current programming.
Katrina, before we
Yes.
move on from that, I would be interested in following this particular cohort for the next 2 years to see where they are at 3rd grade, or I guess the next 3 years.
Yes.
To see where they are at 3rd grade each year, if that's, I mean, even in a board update or
Sure.
preferably in an actual presentation.
Yeah, we'll be doing that. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hasley. So now we're going to discuss who we serve and how, so our current pre-K programming. We're going to look at an overview of the early childhood programs and how our students qualify. We're also going to look at the classroom descriptions and talk about student ratios in our classrooms, and then where these programs are. So if you look at your salmon colored handout, this will help explain who we serve in pre-K. The state of, just some background information, the state of Texas funds our half-day pre-K program, and the students have to be eligible to attend. So for our state-funded half-day program, they have to be ESL, economically disadvantaged, homeless, a child of military or active duty member, ever been part of foster care, or the child of a person eligible for the Star of Texas Award. In our half-day program, once a child qualifies as, for example, ESL or bilingual, we don't go further to see if they qualify as an income student, so economically disadvantaged, because in our half-day we do not feed them. So usually when they qualify already as ESL or bilingual, that's where we stop looking for qualifiers.
So those kids actually could be ED as well, and we just
They-
don't know.
Correct.
Okay.
In our full-day program that started 2 years ago, the students have to be economically disadvantaged. They can also be English language learners or bilingual, and on top of that, they can also receive special education services. Our full-day program, we still only collect half-day ADA on those students. And then we have PPCD, which is our preschool program for children with disabilities. They can begin the day they turn 3 on their 3rd birthday and go all the way through their 5th or until they're kindergarten age eligible. And then we have our Head Start, which is for 3 and 4-year-olds. They are economically disadvantaged as well. This is a federally funded program, and they need to maintain 146 spots filled to continue receiving their grant. And the last option is the tuition-supported half-day program. So any student who does not qualify under any of the other areas, they can come to school paying tuition for a half-day. We have the half-day option there.
About how many students take advantage of that, the paid students?
This year, right now, we have 58 half-day tuition students.
Do we limit that, or that we just don't have more customers than that?
It depends on the campus. At one point, we have to limit because the other ones we cannot limit, so we always have to have space available for the students that qualify.
Okay.
On the salmon-colored sheet, you'll see that all of our full-day programs are at the campuses listed there, the elementary campuses. We also have full-day at our 3 early childhood schools. And then Head Start is its own program aside Meadows. And all of our early childhood schools have the half-day, full-day, and PPCD program, as well as tuition.
Is there any reason that we have an extra teacher when it's the 16 to 2.5 in the early childhood schools, and we don't have it on our satellite campuses?
Yes, our satellite campuses, the teachers are general ed certified, and so they don't have students with special needs in their classrooms. At the early childhood schools, those teachers are duly certified, special ed and general ed, so they have another 0.5 paraprofessional that comes in to support those students as well.
So in the full day classes at our early childhood, there are actually special ed children in those classes as well?
Yes, we have balanced classes, yes.
That's separate from the PPCD classes?
Correct. Yes, for the most part, PPCD is a half day unless the ARD decides that the child needs more services than that. Okay, so how are they served? This slide here explains a little bit more about the classroom descriptions. It's important to know because these makeups, the classroom makeups and student staff ratio will make it understandable in how we can fill our early childhood schools. So the top one, the full-day pre-K classroom at the elementary campus, that is all we have at elementary campuses. We don't offer any of the other types at the elementary campuses, and they are all economically disadvantaged. They can also be ESL or bilingual, and the staff ratio there is 16 to 2. The next 4 types are all at our early childhood schools. So we have full day at early childhood school, and like she pointed out, we have students with special needs in those full day classrooms. We have a half day general ed classroom, and those are state funded and tuition students. The ratio there is 18 to 2. And then in our special ed type classrooms, we have several different ones. An integrated classroom is where we have students who are mainstream, and they still need to be with students who are typically developing, so we have to maintain at least 50% of the students in those classrooms gen ed, so that we can maintain least restrictive environment in those classrooms. Those go up to 18 to 3, and then self-contained classrooms are for our 3-year-old special education students or students who would not benefit from being with others that are typically developing, and those are lower ratios, usually 6 to 10 students in those classrooms. Those are all half-day.
Can I ask a quick question while you're on that?
Sure.
On the state-funded, I'm sorry, on the tuition students, you mentioned that they can, we can take them in as long as we have space available. Do we keep data on how many spots we might have on a wait list of those potential clients that would be tuition-based?
We do. The campuses have wait lists. I don't have data in front of me, but I
Okay.
can get that.
Okay, so we have customers we could be serving potentially.
Not this year, but
If we
I'm
had-
sure in the past, yes.
If we had seats available.
Correct.
Okay.
Okay, and then the last two types of classrooms are just our Head Start classrooms, and they have separated 3-year-old classrooms and 4-year-old classrooms. Those ratios are listed there as well. Okay, so where do we serve our full-day pre-K classrooms? Here what we see are all of the places, and the number after each elementary is obviously is the number of classrooms at that elementary campus. We started with 5 pre-K satellites in 16-17, and from left to right, those 5 were Huffman, Jackson, Christie, Thomas, and Memorial. Those were selected due to the high concentration of economically disadvantaged students and their locations across the district to be able to serve them all in full day. We also opened 2 full-day classrooms at each of the early childhood schools the first year, so for a total of 16. The second year, we added the remaining 6 elementary campuses that you see up there, 1 more classroom at Thomas, 1 more at Beatty, and 2 more at Isaacs for another 16, total of 32. Head Start is listed there in the east side, and out of their 8 classrooms, 6 of those serve 4-year-old students. And they are also, I'm sorry, I didn't mention this, they are also a longer day. They are considered a full day as well, Head Start is.
Do we consider that part of our program when we're doing the longitudinal study? Does Head Start 4-year-old, is it considered part of our program?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Yep. And then, not yet, just on this, yeah. And then where do we serve our half-day students? This is still, sorry, I'm sorry. This is still, the half-day is still only at our early childhood schools, and this shows the number of classrooms at each of those. So remember, when we look at, for example, at Beatty ECS, we have 4 general ed ESL classrooms. Those 4 have a AM and a PM session in them. We have in our PPCD, like I mentioned earlier, we have students who are general ed in those classrooms as well, most of them, for that to be able to maintain the least restrictive environment. With all of these here, we have a total of 58 classrooms, so a capacity of 1,500 seats. That's current for 18-19, half day. We also wanted to look at some of the services provided at our different locations. This will be found on the green handout that you have, labeled education or titled Educational and Family Supports. So when we say the pre-K satellite, those are the elementary campuses, early childhood schools in the middle column, and Head Start on the right. Parent education classes are provided across the board. This year we're also offering, there are team leaders of our full-day classrooms for both satellite campuses and at the early childhood schools, and we're setting up parenting classes at cluster sites across the district, so we can do that 2 to 3 times every semester. Special ed staff, this is also the first year that we are providing speech services for those students in full-day classrooms on the elementary campus. So even though the teacher is not special ed certified, an SLP can come in and provide that therapy for the students. At our early childhood schools and Head Start, we have motor labs, and that's based on a program called Ready Bodies Learning Minds. That was not initially purchased for the satellite campuses because the initial thought was those were going to be temporary. If the board decide, or if the decision is made, those can be purchased for $4,000 a set there. Transportation is somewhat similar across the board. If a elementary campus provides transportation for all their students, the pre-K student is allowed to access that. In early childhood schools, they provide transportation to and from an elementary campus, either in the AM or the PM. So usually every early childhood school has about 12 elementary campuses, and about 6 of those will go to and from the early childhood school in the morning and 6 in the afternoon. So if a child attends full day, they don't have transportation both ways. And then Head Start feeds from the whole district, and they transport their students. Curriculum resources and professional learning is the same for all. We now August 7th, 6th and 7th had everybody together for 2 full days of professional learning. And then medical dental assistant is something that is exclusive to Head Start because of the federal grant that they receive. And then social workers. We have social workers at some of our elementary campuses, parent liaisons at the early childhood schools, and then Head Start does have the social workers.
That was one distinction that I noted, that last year of the 11 satellite campuses, 3 had neither a parent liaison or a social worker. This year that'll go down to 2 because Huffman will get half a social worker, but their caseload will then be probably 3 times what it would be at an early childhood. So how do we, if the school, for example, Foreman doesn't have parent liaison or social worker, Rosemary Hager doesn't, how do those schools get service that the parent liaisons provide at the early childhood schools?
I imagine the counselor works with the families that need, but I don't know.
But that is then an inequity then in the system.
Susanna, on this, the Ready Bodies Learning Minds Lab, would that need to be 1 per campus or per classroom?
1 per campus.
Okay, so if we were to add that would be, we would need that for 11 campuses.
Correct.
Was my number, okay.
Okay. So we reviewed programming and what we have at the campuses. Now we're going to go into part 3, looking at enrollment and capacity, and I'd like to turn it over to Ms. Modisette.
It's not listed on their webpage then.
It's not listed. I believe all of our title campuses have apparently.
Well, as you know, last year Huffman was Title I, and they didn't have either social worker or parent liaison, so
They had apparently it's
not listed.
It may not be listed, but I'm almost sure they do. Yeah, they do.
Now or last year?
Last year.
We'll verify.
Okay.
So we're going to look now at projected enrollment and particularly, are we growing? This slide shows our birth rates, projections, and then the percentage of those students who show up in our kinder classes. And we use these estimates in kindergarten to base our pre-K enrollment. So we're looking at this year's kindergarten enrollment and as a means to project enrollment for the following year. And so as we look at these trends, we don't really expect to see a major increase. We do see that our projected enrollment for kindergarten is fairly close to our actual student enrollment. We typically are within about 30 students. And then our economically disadvantaged rate for kinder is holding fairly steady at about 33%. So what does our enrollment look like historically by program? And I draw your attention first to the top line as we look across, beginning in 2015-16, which is the last year that we had only half-day programming available for pre-K. We had a total of 1,542 students enrolled in our half-day program. Then, as Susanna just reviewed, we opened some full-day classrooms in 2016-17, and our enrollment combined half-day and full-day increased to 1,767. The following year, last year, 17-18, we again increased our number of full-day program classrooms, and our combined half-day and full-day enrollment increased to 1861. We're not really seeing an increase in any of our special populations enrolling other than economically disadvantaged, and you can see that our number of economically disadvantaged students enrolling has increased each year as we've increased our capacity. You'll see the last line on this chart shows economically disadvantaged pre-K students that we've identified by their sibling status. So Susanna said earlier, if our students who are in a half-day program in our early childhood schools qualify under one of the criteria, they're students served under special education or bilingual, ESL, once they qualify, we don't probe for whether they are also economically disadvantaged, because our half-day programs don't offer meals to students. So we've always known that we have students that we're serving in our half-day program that are being served under one criteria, but could qualify as economically disadvantaged as well. So one of the things that we did this summer as we were reviewing our enrollment process was we had a report created that matched any of our 4-year-old students in early childhood schools in a half-day program that were not identified as economically disadvantaged, that had a sibling that was enrolled in one of our schools who does qualify as economically disadvantaged. So that last number of 147 are just 100, we identified 147 additional students who were economically disadvantaged that we were serving in our half-day program.
So you add that to the 648, or it's part of the 648?
No, that's not part of the 648 that we served last year. And then just moving forward, how do we identify our need to plan for growth? And when we initially began looking at offering full-day pre-K to our economically disadvantaged 4-year-olds, we connected with several districts who were already down the road in offering a full-day program similar to the structure that we use. So classrooms that were either located at an early childhood school or on an elementary campus. And they indicated to us that at capacity, kind of at maximum, that they were able to capture about 70% of the students that they estimated would qualify as economically disadvantaged in a full-day pre-K. So to estimate numbers for our planning purposes, we again used the number of economically disadvantaged kindergarten students and projected 70% of that number to determine the target for which to plan.
For the next year?
Yes, kind of in building the program forward.
Susan, didn't Commit show us numbers that show that Dallas is now at 75%?
Yes, and there are districts that have a higher percentage. Dallas, for example, they send teachers into established daycares, into private daycare, so their model is very different than the model that we're using. That's not a model that we've explored, but certainly is something that we could do. So I believe they pay for the teacher to go in, and then the daycare has the facility.
I guess I was just interested in that, not because of their model, but because we have bantered around that it could be family choice, family culture that would cause that 70% to be a ceiling. But then when you look at our schools on the east side, highly Hispanic populations where one might assume that might be the family culture, they actually had very good uptake using our full day program. So I don't think there's anything magical necessarily about 70%
No,
in the
and
culture.
And we feel the same way. But for planning purposes, we were trying to come up with estimating space needed to try to get to a certain level of attendance. And certainly, you know, we would welcome more than 70% and continue to keep looking at that. And I think that's part of the equation of when we get to some of the options of, you know, how close to 70 or beyond does an option kind of get us started in our thinking.
Right. I guess I just wanted to make sure that as we're looking at any level that we're not putting man-made barriers in because
No.
either we limit or transportation is a problem. You know, certainly as a working parent myself, if someone couldn't do at 7:30 to at least 5, it wasn't an option I could partake of to make sure that we don't have stumbling blocks like that.
Yeah, it was truly just used to get a ballpark number to begin planning out.
And that's why we called it a planning target, not a goal, because a goal kind of implies that once you've gotten there, you're done. But for us, it was more about a facility and a planning method to try to see how we accommodate that number as we continue to grow.
We can also always harbor hope that Governor Abbott will continue to support early childhood. On the radio today, he mentioned that starting early is important. So it's like, put your money where your mouth
That's
is.
exactly right. That's right. Actions speak louder than words, right?
This slide offers a little bit more detail, I think, into actually what Tammy was just alluding to. So this was planning based for last school year. We had a projected enrollment when we were looking at kindergarten of 3,563. Of those, 33% were economically disadvantaged, so 1,176 students were economically disadvantaged. And then again, looking at a planning target, if we were able to serve 70% of those students, that would be 823. And then in the chart below shows actual enrollment in pre-K last year. We served in our full day program 443 students who were economically disadvantaged, plus another 105 in our Head Start program, also considered full day, for a total of 548 students served in full day, which is 67% of our planning target or 47% of the total number of economically disadvantaged students. And then in our half-day program, we served an additional 297 economically disadvantaged students, which make up then 36% of our planning target or 25% of the total number of economically disadvantaged students. So as a total, we served 845 economically disadvantaged students last year, either in full day or half-day programming, and that number would give us 102% of the planning target or 72% of the total number of economically disadvantaged students.
Susan, have we ever done any surveys, or can we do a survey to find out why the 297 did not select full day?
Yes, I mean, we can. And one of the things that we also plan to do is to survey our parents this year at parent-teacher conference that are enrolled also in full day and ask, if this program had been half day, would that have been a barrier for you? And if it's a program that's on an elementary campus, because we have two possible suppositions, I guess. One is that if a program is only offered half a day, in a half day, that's a barrier to parents. So we want to be able to flesh that out for how many parents would that have been a barrier. And then second, if the program is on an elementary campus, We also want to explore the theory that our elementary principals would say, which is they believe some of the reason that parents are coming is because they're able to come with older siblings, they know the school, so also to flesh out, is there truth in that? So to ask the question, had this program been offered full day, but at an early childhood school, would you still have taken advantage of it? So we are going to try to explore some of the reasons behind this data a little bit more this year.
Of course, in asking the second question, you may be setting some expectations that we can't fulfill because not all campuses have minimum of 2 extra classrooms. Mm-hmm. And particularly as the population from the apartment, children who come from the apartments, that widely swings from year to year. You may have availability for 2 classrooms one year, the next year only 1, which is not a good scenario for the teacher to be basically without professional colleagues, or you may have none. And so that's something that's the real wild card in this, is looking at the enrollments from the apartments.
Now, there's one other thing that I'll throw in here that Richardson does that we've not done, and it came to light. I was at a meeting at the Richardson Chamber today, and Richardson was talking about their TRE, and so what they do when they have a campus that is at capacity, the next student who arrives is not going to go to that particular school. They're going to go to the next school over to another school, and then when room becomes available, they can come back at a future point. But that's kind of what they've been doing, and that works for them because most of their schools are walk zone schools. You know, they have a lot of them, a lot of elementary schools, and they're kind of small. So the transportation thing hasn't been so big of a deal to them. I remember we talked about this when we were doing realignment stuff, and we were exploring options. So I just throw that out because it came up today, and in light of that comment, that is a flexibility that somebody else is doing that could be considered.
Would that split a family then? That would be the concern I would have.
I guess it could. I guess you would have to control for that, or try to. But I just throw that out there as something somebody else is doing.
Of course, if the hope that hopefully when, not if, Huffman achieves greatness again with the IBPYP program, I would certainly hope that anybody who makes the commitment to Plano to buy a house next to the school can let their child go there, and they wouldn't be precluded from doing so because of how we've chosen to serve early childhood.
Okay. So now we're going to look at numbers and how many students are we serving in full and half day, how many seats do we have, and how do we compare to our current planning target. So I'm going to take your attention now to the purple handout. And this is past and current enrollment and availability in the full day classrooms. So down the left are our early childhood schools, and then every campus that has full day. The next set of columns is 2016-2017 enrollment total and the available spots. These are end of year numbers. And then the program capacity as of 2017-2018. Again, like mentioned earlier, some classes were added in 17-18, so if there was a change in number of classes, you'll see that underneath the total with the availability. And then the last 2 columns are 18-19, enrollment and available spots as of a week ago, 14th of August. So when we look down here, for this year, we have 626, our capacity down the bottom are the totals. We have a capacity of 626 full-day classrooms. A week ago, we had 584 of those spots filled. And in the last column, you'll see The 3 numbers that are at the early childhood schools, the 12 at Isaac, 6 at Pearson, and 8 at Beatty Early Childhood School, those numbers are spots, or those spots are the ones that are left open for the students who begin attending at an elementary campus and then determined by an assessment or an ARD that they need to receive special education services above and beyond speech therapy. We hold spots for those students to be able to continue in a full-day classroom, but at the early childhood school, so they can be served with a duly certified teacher.
So is it fairly accurate to say we're full because you're having to hold that capacity right now?
Right, we're holding that capacity. The only openings that we do have are the 17 bilingual openings at the 4 different campuses as of a week ago. The following sheet, the blue one, is the same type, past and current enrollment, but this has to do only with our half-day classrooms. So again, our half-day, how many students are we serving in half-day? These are only at our early childhood campuses. And on the full half-day. There you go, thank you. So what does this show? If you see the trend of 16, 17, 17, 18, and 18, 19, obviously the 16, 17, and 17, 18 numbers are end of year. So when you look down, there is a big difference between 16, 17, 17, 18, and then this current year. It shows that we have 609 available spots. What we need to remember is that at our early childhood schools, particularly in the PPCD classrooms, the special ed classrooms, those classrooms have to have availability for students to begin when they turn 3 all throughout the year. So our enrollment changes probably more than any other grade level throughout the year. So at the end of last year, we had 313 spots available in our half-day program. Again, those are targeted or tagged for specific types of students, because if you look across Beatty last year, at the end of the year, they had 19 spots that were specifically for bilingual students. So unfortunately, those aren't always interchangeable numbers.
Susanna, can you just summarize the conclusion out of all of that?
Yes, yes. So total capacity that we have, and we'll see this in another slide, but total capacity we have this year for half day is 1,500. We have 609 spots still available, and we are assuming, based on the past 2 years, that at least 300 of those will fill up.
Okay, so leaving about 300.
Correct.
Still.
Mm-hmm. Yes, when looking at the past 2 years. Mm-hmm. So in looking forward in planning, if those are the, for lack of better words, right types of seats, we would be able to look at converting some of those half-day general ed into full day, if that's how we chose to move forward.
So let me ask a question, going back to the purple sheet.
Yes.
To Tammy's question, if we're full, are we turning kids away?
We have wait lists. Now, we always offer the half-day program. We don't ever turn away. There's always availability in the half-day.
So it sounds like the demand is in the full day. That's the demand we're not able to meet currently, is in the full day. There's spots in the half day, but people are electing not to take those spots if they're on the wait list?
We do have wait lists on full day, and some of them are in half-day, but remain on the wait list to go.
Oh, I see.
Mm-hmm.
So do we have, you may not even know this, do we have people who need full day and that's their only option, and so they're on the wait list for full day, but they're not taking a half-day spot?
I don't
Do we
know.
know that?
I imagine there may be some. Yes, I don't know that.
Okay.
Well, I have a question then.
Yes.
You've got half-day seats available. Could they be converted to full-day seats?
They could.
Okay.
Are you talking in the future?
Well, in the 3 early childhood centers where you have half-day spots that you're not filling, 300-ish, could we convert those to full day and reduce that wait list that you have for the full day?
We would have, for consideration for this year, I'm not sure, but we can definitely look forward in planning and turn those into full-day spots. We just need to be careful because if we are going to create more full-day with the balanced classrooms, if we don't have enough typically developing peers in our half-day PPCD, we end up coming out of compliance with least restrictive environment. So as long as
Can you tell me a little more about that least
Sure.
restrictive? I don't know
Sure.
how that defines.
Sure. So IDEA says that when a student qualifies as having special needs, they have to be served in, I'll say, the least restrictive environment. That means that if they are able to be educated with typically developing peers in a mainstream classroom, that's where they need to be educated.
Okay.
So there are some cases where that is not the best scenario for a student and they need a more self-contained to meet their needs, and they would not benefit necessarily from being with typically developing peers.
So a question though, if a student is economically disadvantaged, their family structure requires that it's either full day or they can't participate in Plano offerings, we would tell them that we can't accept you unless you take half day because we have to maintain this other balance. So we would turn away that economically disadvantaged child seeking full day.
Are you talking a student with special needs? Or? No.
This is just an economically disadvantaged kids where you would say, I need to keep this balance, and I understand some of the background behind that, but this child comes, they need full day. We need to keep them to help balance out the half day, so we would turn them away.
We need to keep them to help balance out the half. Yes, if we don't have spots in the full day, they can go on a wait list and access our half day if that's a possibility for the family.
Well, just the conversation we were talking about, if we have basically 300 spots that are half day right now.
Correct.
If we convert them to 150 full day spots, and so we could fill that, and so children might decide to migrate from half day out of these blended classrooms into the full day, you would prevent a child from doing that because you need them to stay in the half day?
I think that if we were to choose to move into full day right now, that would be a conversation that we'd have to have. But again, the classrooms, the makeup, that's why I explained when we explained the type of classrooms and the makeup of the classrooms, it's a very close number in that it's not all that can just be converted easily.
And I don't think that we've denied anybody at this point, but that is something that we can go in and check, because one of the other things that we could do once we've maxed out is instead of having 16 to 2 in a classroom, then maybe we add 17 or 18 in a classroom. I would feel pretty confident saying that as of today, we have not turned anyone away, but that is a discussion and something that we'll have to be on top of, especially with enrollment probably increasing within the next 2 weeks.
But you said we have a wait list. So is that not turning someone away, or I don't understand that part.
Well, we would need to look to see who's on the wait list and the reason they are on the wait list.
Okay.
Because there may be a case where I'm on the wait list because I only want to go here and there's not a spot here. So we can certainly follow back up on that.
I'm going to tell y'all that I'm not a huge fan of a 4-year-old being on a wait list when they need this service to make sure that they are on par at 3rd grade, which is kind of the critical time. And so I'm not this is not happy news for me to find out that there's a wait list for this.
Why don't we
we'll
take a
follow
look
up.
at to see what the scope of the weight is? And it might be based upon the ratios that have been used to date. You know, maybe providing flexibility with ratios addresses maybe some of those.
Going from 16 to 17 or more.
Yes.
Okay, the next sheet that we're looking at is also in your handout packet. It is on white paper. It has the blue and yellow highlights titled Enrollment by Attendance Zone. So as you can see, this is quite the involved little sheet here. We'll just start from the left to the right. And I will use the top school Barron as an example. So these are 17-18 numbers. And like Ms. Modisette said, we used the 17-18 kindergarten numbers for our planning purposes. So Total kindergartners enrolled at, from the Barron attendance zone in 17-18 was 70. Out of those, 55 qualified as economically disadvantaged. Total students we served in pre-K from that attendance zone the same year, so we're not looking at a cohort, we're looking at the same year, was 45 students, with 37 of those qualifying as economically disadvantaged.
So the other 8 qualified because of language or special ed?
Yeah, or foster. Of the 37 students that we served in pre-K as economically disadvantaged, 29 of those were in half-day, and 8 were in full-day, which would include Head Start, 6 of those 8 in Head Start. So the total of, or the percentage of economically disadvantaged served in half-day was about half of them, and in full-day was about 14.5. So when looking at the kindergarten total of 55, and we served 8 in full day, that means that we're still looking to serve, well, if we were to meet 100%, we'd still need to serve 47 more. But our planning target here is 70%. So we would still need to capture 31 students. So the highlighted number there is 31 students that we need to either pull over from half day into full day, or new students, capture new students, if our target or our planning target is 70% in full day.
So can I stop you real
Yes.
quick? I'm trying to get my hands around
Yes,
it.
it's
Okay, so Barron.
Yes.
We served 37 students in pre-K. That was not located, oh, wait a minute, excuse me, half-day. Where is the half-day? 29.
Yes.
Okay. We served 29 in half-day, but that wasn't at Barron. That was at the early childhood, correct?
Correct.
All right.
Yes. The campus, you're absolutely right. The campuses that do have full-day pre-K are the blue on the left.
Okay. And so
Yes.
that full day was not at their campus either. So they came to their home campus, Barron, and took a bus? Is that how they got to their blue campus, their assigned campus?
Yes, yes, they would probably take the bus. So this is from the Barron attendance zone. You're right.
Correct.
These are not
Okay.
pre-K students that attended Barron. I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. I
Yes.
just want to clarify.
Yep, yep.
Thanks.
So 29 of those attended half-day, I'm assuming all of them at Isaac's.
Okay.
And then 6 went to Head Start, and the other 2 probably attended either Isaac's full day or transfer to Thomas or Christie, one of the
Right.
other full day sites.
Okay.
So the penultimate column there is the pre-K economically disadvantaged served in any pre-K program, so half and full day, we captured 67% of their economically disadvantaged students. Just remember also that there probably are more out there, but they may have qualified initially as bilingual, ESL, or special education. So this is separated by East, Central, and West. The highlighted numbers are any campus that had 10 or more students that we still need to serve or are looking to capture in full day to get to that 70% planning target.
Highlighted in yellow.
Highlighted in yellow, yes. So the total need in the East feeder, if you see that little break between the East and the Central, is 105 students still needed. When you go down the Central, we still have 139 that we are looking to either bring into full day from half day or brand new students. And then in the West cluster, there's a total of 59 students.
Susanna, is it a little bit more than that? Because I see that for some reason Rosemary Hager is in a negative position, so it's actually taking 8 off the total, but you can't have negative kids, so wouldn't that be then
Right.
67? If you don't subtract out that 8, the others total up to 67.
I believe we did it so that it does not take in negative numbers, but I can verify that as we move on to make sure. Yeah, and that, again, that's showing because we are comparing kinder to pre-K of the same year. So there will be a difference in those. But yeah, I'll verify that now when I get a moment.
So back to the Barron example, just so I'm understanding the
Yes.
numbers. So the total in kindergarten, they're economically disadvantaged, was 55.
Mhm.
The total pre-K was 45. And if you're assuming that the pre-K and the K are the same number, does that mean that there are 10 children who are probably economically disadvantaged that are seeking no help right now?
Right, assuming that pre-K is equal to kindergarten, yes.
You are taking the negative numbers into account. The,
Oh,
you have
okay. It should be
67.
67.
And 109
Okay.
on this cluster.
Thank you.
Okay, so this is another question to ask. If you refer back to the purple sheet,
Mhm.
it says that Sigler and Weatherford
Yes.
are going to Beatty.
Yes. They are, I'm sorry, finish your question.
No, so my question is, yeah, why are they different? And then is that affects then the availability?
So Sigler and Weatherford, when you look at the district, are in the central.
Right.
Because Pearson is a smaller school and also houses our deaf ed program, our feeder, and we'll see that later on, our actual feeder takes some of schools which would normally be in the central cluster and feeds them to Beatty. There you go. All
What?
Beatty.
Everything that feeds to Vines High School goes to Beatty right now.
Because
Okay.
So it's not aligned by, our traditional concept of cluster.
Right.
This is geographical, not necessarily feeder to the early childhood.
It's
That's
fine.
why we included the column on the right of the white chart that shows where the kids in that elementary school feed in the early childhood scenario.
Okay, and I
Because
see.
it's not a clean feeder because of the size of the campuses and what Pearson has for specialized programming for deaf ed. They don't have the capacity.
Gotcha.
in
Is
their
it a deaf ed pre-K program or just a deaf ed program?
Deaf ed pre-K.
And
And, yeah.
which
deaf
is
ed.
our most west ECS?
Beatty.
It is Beatty.
Mhm.
So that's why Beatty's number, okay.
Did you get that clarified, Tammy? You asked, is it a definite pre-K?
And she said, yes, it
It
is.
is, okay, all right.
Okay. So what do these trends tell us and kind of what is our current status? Again, in summarizing part 3 that we've just looked at, Ms. Modisette showed us that the birth rate trends project stable enrollment and align pretty closely to the actual kindergarten enrollment. Over the past few years, we've seen that 1/3 of our kindergarten students are identified as economically disadvantaged. When looking at kindergarten, 72 backwards, so kindergarten of 17-18, who attended pre-K in 16-17, 72% of our economically disadvantaged kindergartners attended in 16-17, 25% of those at half day, and full day was 47%. 1/3 of all kindergarten students attended pre-K in Plano ISD. We have to also remember that or imagine, consider how many may not qualify, because again, pre-K, unlike the other grade levels, you have to qualify, otherwise you pay tuition to come. So how many of our students would qualify? We have seen a slight increase in economically disadvantaged students over the past 3 years, a slight decline, and stable enrollment in our other special programs. For this year, 18-19, our full day capacity is 626 with 42 spots available. And then our half day is 1,500 capacity with 609 spots available.
But you need a little asterisk there, the whole conversation we had about
Yes,
how the
with
3-year-olds.
yes.
Right.
Yeah.
It's kind of like the parking lot at a high school. Halfway through
Yes,
the year,
as they
get their
turn
driver's
16.
license.
Exactly. So as they turn 3, they come. We are 275 students away from reaching our 70% full-day planning target. And then half-day and full-day does offer the Plano ISD families choice. So now as we look forward into the future, I will pass it on to Ms. Bonser.
So one real quick question, just to finalize this. What's the wait list? About how many students and how many was it last year?
I don't have that information, but I can get it.
We will follow up.
Yes.
And is there a possibility we have on the wait list tuition-paying students, like students who want to be in our program, but
It is a possibility. I do know because I asked that. We don't have a wait list for the tuition students now.
okay, so our wait list is completely for those students who qualify or ED?
Correct, for full day.
Full day.
Yes, if there is one, but I will verify that.
We'll bring that information back.
Yes.
Okay.
Certainly before we go on, I mean, this chart was very busy. There's a lot you can
Yes.
learn from that. But some of the things that struck me is the large number of economically disadvantaged kids who are not participating in either full or half day. And so that's probably upwards of 300 kids. So that worries me a lot for our future. Also, when you look at our schools that I would consider high need based on the recent STAR results, there are probably close to 200 pre-K kids that attend those schools or will attend those schools that are not doing anything. So that's extraordinarily worrying to me. You know, schools like Barron and Christie and Huffman are not going to get better unless we help them get better from the time they're 4 years old.
So as we move into part 4 of this part of the presentation, we'll discuss options for considerations around the idea of facilities. Basing our work on the elementary call to action and the 2016 bond proposal, the administration has looked at the expansion of full-day pre-K for economically disadvantaged students and created a variety of options for discussion. In slide 2, it was stated that the district was charged with looking at current space as well as the need for additional space of construction. For that purpose, 2 options involve using current space and 2 options call for construction of additional space. We have based our need for this discussion upon the additional space meeting the 70% planning target, trying to get at least another 275 economically disadvantaged kids into the full-day program, either from moving them from half-day to full-day or finding new economically disadvantaged students who are not currently participating into the full-day pre-K program. We know that no option costs are definitive, and the reason for this is that every time we move a student from half-day to full-day, we gain an efficiency in the half-day side that translates to an offset. So in calculating costs, please understand that these are ballpark figures because we don't know exactly how many we can get to move over from half-day to full-day. But for the planning purposes, we have shown at a maximum amount, what would that cost be if all the seats were additional, knowing full well that the offsets will come from transitioning kids from one program to the other, as well as for all new students that you add, you gain half day of ADA.
Right.
And so that's also a consideration of financial offset to increasing our program enrollment for pre-K.
Sarah, do you think that because of the, we have the shorter summer this 1 year because of the early start date or earlier start date, do you think we will have a bigger impact on increased enrollment because of that? I know you mentioned that at the beginning in your welcome back to school talk. How will that translate into potentially the early childhood? Have we thought about keeping that number as a placeholder?
Which number is a placeholder?
Well, that estimate, I don't know, percentage that you think might increase in enrollment because of this shorter.
It's possible. It's a little bit hard to say because our full day program is pretty much full.
Okay.
If we're on a wait list except for bilingual seats, our full day program kids have enrolled. And so there is that factor that makes me, I want to say yes to that, but I'm not sure that that's necessarily true.
It's just
It's
something to
possible.
consider. Okay.
Mhm. what we hope comes from this part of the discussion is a clearer picture of the board's thoughts and ideas around any option or combination of options as it pertains to continued expansion of the pre-K program, either in existing or new facilities. And so Randy and Susanna are going to continue to move us through this part of the conversation.
Okay, so this slide is a summary of the need for additional space that got our facility planning, how we plan for the future, what is our capacity for growth. Aside from ESC additional classrooms at each, we have some limited space for full day. So what is our planning target? 275 more to reach the 70% target for full day. Actually, that number is slightly smaller than that now, just because our enrollment, when that number was calculated, was 548, and we're actually at 584 now. So the 548 was using last year, and so we've actually closed in on that, about 36, 38 additional students. Do we have room for growth in our existing pre-K classrooms? Our total capacity is 626, and we have 42 unfilled seats currently. Half day, as has been said earlier, we have 1,500 capacity, and we have 609 unfilled seats. So some of the questions, where do we have existing capacity in our buildings? Has our need exceeded existing facilities, and when do we foresee exceeding if not? So we looked at 4 different options on how do we plan for the future expansion of pre-K. First, we look at how to use existing pre-K classrooms, looking at class size, teacher to student ratios. Option B was increasing the number of full-day pre-K classrooms at elementary campuses. Option C was to build additional classrooms. And D is to build early childhood school number 4. We actually did 2 different under option D, so there's really 5 different options that we'll show you here in just a minute. A starting point for us was just to look at what some of our peer districts around us are doing. And this can be for bragging rights, or this can just be how you want to look at it. So obviously we currently have the full day pre-K, the full day programming, the half day. We have 1,861 students. That's what we had in 17-18. In our general ed class size ratio in half day is 18 students for 2 staff, so that's 1 teacher, 1 teacher aide. And the full day is 16 students for the 2 staff members. Frisco only has full day bilingual. They do have all these have the half day, so I won't go through that. They have 807 that are enrolled in pre-K, and their ratio is 20-2 in the bilingual classes and 15-2 in the half-day pre-K. Louisville only has tuition supported on the full day. They have 1,799, and they have a 22-2 ratio in general ed. So all the rest of these have a 22-2 ratio, so I won't read that again. Richardson, Allen, McKinney, and Garland, none of those have full-day pre-K, and you can see their numbers shown below. So just to give you an idea about what the districts around us are doing.
Just a question, how did we originally pick the 16-2 and the 18-2? There must have been some rationale for that. Good rationale, I assume, because it's a good low number.
Initially, the full-day classrooms and half-day classrooms were all 18-2, and because they were general ed, the 18-2 was done in full day as well. With the students in 17-18 was when we moved the full day classrooms back to 16-2 because of the needs of the students. Initially, why it was 18-2 in the beginning, when they first opened, I do not know that.
Okay, but the 16-2 was based on providing the students with the most appropriate education. Okay. I personally worried a lot when I saw the 22-2, and I went to look at the National Association for Education of Young Children, which set standards in this area, and they didn't have anything listed that was more than 20-2. So I don't want us to walk into a bad situation and not serve children well.
Okay, on the next slide, one note here is our Head Start classrooms are staffed at a 19-2 ratio. When we look at this, we have our west campuses. On the left, we've got our central and our east. And so if we increase class size from the current 16 to 2 in the general ed in the full day, and we go up to 18, up to 20, and up to 22, then we can pick up just in the west cluster 22 to 66 seats. The same would be true in the central cluster. In the east could pick up 20 to 60 seats. So when you total that, 18 to 2 would pick up 64 district-wide in full day, 20 to 2 would pick up 128, and 22 to 2 would pick up 192. So just so you're aware of the impact that would have. So when we look in summary, the full day pre-K target at 70% is 823. Last year we had 275 to meet that. Current total full day pre-K is 626. And we have 42 unfilled seats. So option A, if we increase class size, we could pick up 64 to 192 seats. And where that would put us in relation to our target would be 84% to 99% if we went all the way up to 22. When we look at cost of that option, the only additional cost would be is additional furniture within the classroom. Typically, we don't anticipate additional support staff. There would be no additional classroom teachers or teacher aides because all those would be covered. And so the only additional cost that we foresee would be furniture.
I think if we were going to look at this, and I keep harping on this whole idea of this wait list, but if we're wait listing people because we're keeping an arbitrary number of 16 to 2, that's not a good reason to wait list. If we can work within larger numbers, increase those ratios to make sure that nobody is sitting on a wait list waiting. And if we get to 20 to 2, talk about adding a staff member to a campus who can be shared between 2 classrooms as an additional half person in the classroom. I think that's something that's worthy of discussing.
But I would agree only with that caveat, because we don't want to deteriorate the experience and have none of the kids have a great experience.
I agree. I'm with you on the support. I mean, we want to make sure that this is an enriching experience for these children who need this. And so we need to make sure that we're thinking through the way to make sure to support that properly if we do increase size. Because I like 16 to 2 as well, but I don't want 16 to 2 at a campus to mean that there's 2 kids at the door who don't get in.
And I would just like to just chime in on this. And when we were looking at all the research, at any ratio, the quality of the program is the driver. And so even a 16 to 2 without a quality staffed program or quality resources, quality experiences, you could have an even smaller student-teacher ratio and not end up with kindergarten readiness. So I think it's important to keep the idea of class size in balance with quality pre-K, and that quality in this, I mean, it matters in every case, but it really matters in this case.
And I think one other thing I'd like to point out with regard to that, and also Tammy, to your comment, because we offer Head Start, I think that whatever capacity or flex needs to be in line with Head Start. That is a federal program, and they do set a 20 to 2 cap, or at the state, it's 22. And so we would never, I don't think it would be good practice to be at a 22 at a gen ed full day that's non-Head Start, and then have our Head Start at 20 to 2. So keeping that in mind and keeping that balance is also, I think, important to consider.
And I think certainly in the regular classrooms, he would advocate for even lower ratios because they don't have all the support that Head Start has, where a social worker actually crafts a plan for the family, with the family. And so you're really looking at serving the needs of the child and the family. And so you can also have 16 kids, but if you have 16 kids who've had significant adverse childhood experiences, by the time they hit your doors, they're going to need some special help too.
Okay, as we look at option B, so this is looking at increasing the number of full-day classrooms on elementary campuses. And just to give you an idea district-wide, what is our maximum existing capacity? Now, all of these obviously couldn't be used for pre-K, but because some of these may be higher level or designed for higher level, but just to give you an idea district-wide, So if we take our elementary capacity district-wide and we take each campus times 90% functional capacity, which is what our demographer uses, we come up with an elementary capacity, if you just take our elementary campuses, of 29,500. Our 17-18 enrollment at our elementary campuses was 23,500. And so you could say we had 6,000 possible open seats on elementary campuses in 17-18. If we take the demographer's report and we look at the peak enrollment of every one of those campuses over the next 8 years, so we pick and choose, they may be at their peak now, they may be at their peak in year 3, 5, 8, whenever that is, we take the peak of every campus and line those up. Our elementary maximum projected enrollment is 24,500. And so even at the peak of every campus, we're estimating we have about 5,000 available seats. Now there's some variables in that, but just to give you some framework over what we have as far as empty classrooms on elementary campuses.
This is a hot button for me. I'll just put it right out there. And I think one thing that surprised me is now we're using 90%. I have historic documents from Richard Matkin that used 85%. So I don't know why the change, and that makes a difference of about 1,700 seats. So just something to keep in mind. Our demographer has been spectacularly bad at estimating apartment growth and the yield. I mean, it goes back to 2010, where he was saying there were no more children coming out of the Haverford apartments when we were seeing the children show up at Huffman. So I really, really caution. We need to look at those with a grain of salt, particularly as he presented to us last time. It was 47 pages on the 700 single-family sites left to be built in Plano, and I think 2 pages on apartments. So we need to make sure, we need to push the demographer to look more closely at apartments, because they can swing on you like nobody's business. They raised the rent at the Gramercy apartments right there on Plano Parkway. 40 kids left Huffman. Rents went back down, 40 kids came back from Huffman. So it swings so violently.
And we have been looking at apartments in more detail with the demographer since those points were made back in February. He's actually gone back and he's run the enrollment by campus from apartments. We've got at least a 10-year history there. And so he's also gone in, and we get a more detailed report than what the board gets. It's right, this is one of the books of it, but it does have a significant section in there that's on apartments, which elementary they feed into, and what the enrollment is, what impact they're having on each one of the campuses. So there is more information we can share there.
Well, it's very germane to the decisions that we're making. And in the past, asking questions about how many kids living in the neighborhood around Huffman were attending Huffman, the answer was 112. And I said, I knew that couldn't be the case. They're just the families I know. Turns out there were only 47 kids in the neighborhood actually attending Huffman, and the other 60 almost had gone to neighboring schools, had sought transfer. It was a 50% transfer rate, and that wasn't known to the demographer. So we just need to really dig and push to make sure we're getting the right answers.
Sure, and I would say any of those questions that we can prepare for beforehand, because those are very specific questions, I'm sure he can bring better data to a board meeting. Okay, as we look at option B, so we went through the list, and we'll look at that here in just a second. Where do we have capacity to expand existing facilities? We looked at campuses that we felt pretty certain would have space to add at least 2 pre-K classrooms. And those are the ones you see, those by East, Central, and West. The ones that are highlighted in blue are the ones that currently have a pre-K. And so the others obviously would be new for pre-K campuses. The only exception to this is Beatty may not be able to hold 2. It may only be able to have 1 additional full-day pre-K. And if we can go to the spreadsheet. Okay, and this is a similar spreadsheet to what we just looked at. This does show that functional capacity at 90%. It shows the peak enrollment. It shows the percentage of functional capacity at the peak, the number of students to meet the 70% target that we looked at previously, 17-18 actual enrollment, percentage of all economically disadvantaged, and percentage of mobility. And so, again, this was basically what drove the campuses when we looked at them, that we felt good that even if we had 2 pre-Ks, that we wouldn't hit their peak enrollment that the demographers projected through 2019, 2026. That's not an absolute. I would say we'd want to drill into these further if we started adding pre-Ks and work with the demographer in more detail. But this is just taking the data that we already had prepared, just trying to make some projection on possibly where we could add pre-K.
So Randy, when I look at this, the schools that are in white are the only schools that would not have a program on its campus. Because the blue ones currently have them,
That
and the
is-
red ones would be new ones.
That is correct.
And the
Yes,
white would
ma'am.
be without. Okay.
That's correct.
We're not saying that those campuses would necessarily have one, but that their capacity shows that there might be space to consider adding.
Okay.
And then also need of the students and where they're coming from.
I mean, if
as
you
far as
look at
attendance
Darien,
goes.
where there's a lot of uncaptured, economically disadvantaged kids, you start to match up where's the greatest
Yeah.
need with where's there a greater available space to consider,
Mhm.
you know, meeting a need right where it's at, so.
I would say that even though Andrews and Skaggs and Wyatt are in the west cluster, they're 14 miles away from Mitchell. So that it's not reasonable to take kids from the southwest quadrant and send them up to those schools. I mean, Mitchell's in Dallas and Andrews is almost in Frisco.
No, and what we have to be thinking about, especially with Mitchell, is their enrollment more than any other dips and rises and dips. As you said, the peaks and the valleys are very high and then low. And so when you think about adding, if there were an added satellite, you would want that satellite to relieve Beatty so that the Mitchell students could attend Beatty, which is much closer to their campus. I mean, if that, you know, where you shift it north so that they're not driving past one to get to try to limit that as
Right.
much as
I
possible.
mean, 14 miles for someone who's 4
Yeah.
years old is.
Well, and that's
a long
what we
way.
said, a lot
40
of the
minutes.
decisions that have been made about placement were minimizing the length of time a little one's on the bus, always.
And the other thing about Mitchell, last year when their capacity went up, the discussion was that they should go down to only one pre-K class, which would leave that teacher without a peer. I certainly would hope, as we continue to look at satellite, we never allow less than 2, because it's just bad practice.
Susan, do we have any singletons at this time that you're aware of?
I might has none, but no, we don't currently, but we do have singletons at our elementary campuses, you know, that are elementary teachers. We don't have any pre-K singletons right now.
Okay.
But I know the conversation has happened, so we just need to decide whether that's an okay conversation or whether that's a conversation that should never happen.
You mean single?
Yes, having just one
One-
pre-K classroom.
At a
one
campus.
section.
Let me ask just a logistics question. So let's use Mitchell as an example. Mitchell is full. The next option for a Mitchell student would be Beatty?
It could be, I mean, sorry. They could transfer to Jackson, probably is the Rose Hager.
Yeah, Hager. I mean, that's an option. That's what I was thinking. I kind of missy the model you're talking about that Richardson uses, which is the next school. So if we reach a capacity at one elementary school, is the next school down the street an option?
And almost, yes, and almost all of our elementary classrooms of pre-K have kids that have transferred in from other schools. So the bulk of them come from the campus, but there are, I mean, it varies, but 6 or 8, maybe more, students that are there from another campus as well.
And that doesn't bother me, David, if it's pre-K kids that are moving around in somewhat of a quadrant. I wouldn't want that to be a solution once they hit kindergarten, not let a child who is zoned there not go to their own school.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That
I was just
personally-
suggesting as a way to meet the immediate need, where we might have space in a pre-K next door.
And what you'll see on the placement of the locations where the satellites currently are, which are those highlighted in blue, is that they tried to spread them out so that there was, if you couldn't get in one, you were closer than crossing town to get to the next available seat.
But of those schools in the southwest quadrant, Jackson is the only one that could fairly reliably always have capacity, because that's a really, really big school. It's one of the bigger elementaries. with Hager, Mitchell, Huffman, those are all going to fluctuate a lot more on you.
We also use 2 as, we would add 2, but it could be that you added 3. If the
3's
space-
fine.
Yeah,
2 or more.
You could add 3,
Yeah.
or, if you could add 1 more additional at an early childhood school, and we wouldn't necessarily need to add 2, because they're already serving pre-K full day.
Right.
So they would have that collaboration already there.
I know the conversation happened at least twice over the last year to have just a single, and I just want to make sure that's something we think is okay.
So we can put that on our guiding principle.
Okay, any other questions on this spreadsheet? All right, Mr. Dan. Okay, so if we look at the cost of increasing the number of full-day classrooms, the ones in blue are probably not realistic, but if we took all those campuses that we talked about and we added 2 to every one of them, then that would be the projected cost. What we'll look at, though, is the right-hand column, that if we add 18 classrooms, what would that cost be? So as we go through these scenarios, anytime that we add a full-day class, it's going to cost a projected $90,000 to add a teacher and a teacher aide. And so you'll see that as a constant number. So the 1.62 is just 90 times 18. So we won't go through that every time. The additional furniture fixtures per classroom when we're actually adding a classroom, again, this is an estimate. It depends on what's currently in that classroom, but we're estimating about $20,000 per classroom. That could be technology, manipulatives, and so on. So that for 18 classrooms, that would cost about $360,000. Some of these campuses, I believe there's 9 of them that don't currently have a pre-K playground, and so the cost of that is about $40,000 per campus. So that would be about $360,000 if we added to all these sides. There could be restroom modifications just because of the little pre-K kids. We hate to guess at that because that's going to be so dependent on the campus. So I just tell you there could be a cost there. We don't know what that could be. Excluding that, the one-time costs are roughly $720,000, and the ongoing costs are about $1.62 million. Now, obviously, anytime if it's a brand new student coming in that's in full day pre-K, that would be additional ADA that we receive. So on a regular pre-K student, we receive about $3,000 per ADA for half-day ADA. Now they're all considered economically disadvantaged, and so that adds about 20% to that number. So that would be about $3,600. If they're bilingual, it adds about another 10%. So that would get them up closer to $3,900. And if they're special ed, it really just depends on their instructional setting. It would be from that number on up. So just to give you an idea about what it would cost. So obviously it's 16 to 2. The ADA is probably not going to offset the cost, just so you're aware of that. Okay, so
how did we get the 18? I'm sorry. Why did we get 18 classrooms?
Just to hit, I think that number, if you
That
go to
gets
the
us to
next one.
275.
Okay, there you
We're
go.
looking for
Yeah,
this-
sorry.
we're
So that's-
looking for a certain number
Got
of
it.
kids
That's
to
right.
come
So
in.
that would, it's 16 to 2, 18 classrooms would add 288
I'm with
seats
it.
in full day.
Okay, thanks.
The top part of this didn't change. I'm not going to rehash that, but on full day, it would meet our target. The one-time costs are $720,000, and then the ongoing are the 1.62 that we talked about. Okay, as we move to option 3, this would be adding on to the current 3 early childhood schools, and we feel that we could add 4 on to Beatty, 2 on to Pearson, and 2 on to Isaacs. There again, it depends on what class size we're looking at, but that would add somewhere between 128 and 176 seats by those 8 additional classrooms. Let's go on to the next one.
So question though, is that on Beatty, is that a max? It seems to be one of our bigger issues. Beatty's already full. The West Cluster has such widely varying enrollment. Is there
Can you
room
go
to do
back?
more than 4?
I mean, physically land.
Yeah,
Yeah.
space, plus the cafeteria.
So we feel pretty good about 4. We think we could possibly go more than that if we go further west. We do have more open space on that end of the building. We were trying to be conservative on these numbers. We'd really want to engage an architect and look more specifically if we want to pursue those options. But I do have a drawing that adds 4 classrooms that some of our staff.
Yeah, I looked at the Google map to see the location as well, and so, I mean, West Cluster is where we have our problem. So we need creative solutions there.
Randy, one more question. When you look at 16 to 2, 18 to 2, 20 and 22, you're only assuming that this is going to be the capacity in the new classrooms. But if you're going to deploy 18 to 2 or 20 to 2 in the entire campus, then the overall increase is going to be
That's right.
larger than those numbers.
That's true. So that would be a combination of option A and C.
and C.
Correct.
But with A, you can't multiply it times all the classrooms because you still have a lot of classrooms that are special education there. Like more than 2/3 of the classrooms.
But it's more than these numbers.
Yes, you would gain more.
So just reflecting back on the chart that looks, it's called Enrollment by Attendance Zone, the one that had the need by feeder. So it looks like this. Okay. Okay. So I'm just comparing the option C by early childhood school to the need by cluster or feeder, however we want to call it. So the need in East is 109, and Central is 139, and West is 67. So those are children to identify. So the biggest unmet need, it seems to me, is that might be in the Central area. There are more kids there that are undiscovered, or, we haven't found them yet. I mean, that's like double. Am I looking at that right?
Correct. Based on the schools there in the central zone, it looks like we are missing 139 students who are economically disadvantaged.
And Missy, I'm all about serving them too, but I think in the West Cluster, we're counting on keeping 6 classrooms at schools where the enrollments vary widely. And so you can't count on it.
I just don't want to overlook
Right.
I mean, there's variability, is I think what you're saying, but there's also volume in another adjacent community.
So when you look at that 139 that is not found, if you will, is there something that we can do better to target in that area in the central cluster? Or how do we explain why that number is larger than, say, in the east or the west? Just a curious thought.
I'm not sure. I mean, some of those, so 139 is to be able to serve, that's how many we still need to serve in full day. So some of those are being served in half day, whether by availability or choice. And the remainder, I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah.
But, okay, you had said earlier that Weatherford and Sigler were actually being served. Does that make the numbers messed up or anything? And that,
They're counted in the central cluster.
do what?
They're counted in the central cluster where they belong.
Correct, but we're sending students to, if I understand this, we're sending students to Beatty.
Yes, but they both have their own programs on their
Okay.
campus. But you're right, all of those schools that are the Vines feeder attend Beatty for early childhood.
Okay, so when we get back to the maps, those numbers and percentages, do they include, I mean, that is how that includes those students when we get to the map page in option D?
I think it does. Yeah.
Yeah, the 2 maps. So when we have,
Well, given what you guys were saying earlier about regardless of the feeder pattern for K to 12, the feeder pattern for early childhood is just different.
it's different.
Yes.
So you're
And
looking at
it's-
the feeder pattern here that's normal, not the feeder pattern for pre-K.
Right, but
And
that
so-
picture is pre-K feeder pattern, right? So that's.
So when you're talking about, when we get to that, we need to be considering that we have the whole Vines feeder pattern is in that piece. And so you're talking about Southwest Plano as being a problem when, I mean, being the high need, but we're looking at a big chunk of those students are coming from Central Cluster.
Right. That's a good point.
And so that's why this was the one that we're going back to here was placed the way that it is, because when we're looking geographically at the areas, the need is in the central area. So whether those schools feed to Beatty or not, if we are able to find campuses that we can add to in that central cluster, we can then go to those. So geographically, we're not driving students.
Exactly. Well, yeah. But we're talking about the Southwest cluster, or that piece being where all this need is. I'm hearing you all say the need is Central Cluster. It's not the Southwest has its issues clearly, but I think we need to have a light bulb moment that our Central Cluster again needs to be looked at.
Well, and then you said that Beatty was the smaller of the 3 early childhood centers, and so if we have capacity. Oh, Pearson's. Okay, I've got it backwards then. All right, I'm wrong.
That is the reason the central cluster feeds over.
Okay, all right.
But it's maybe escalating the picture
For the southwest.
for the Southwest quadrant in a way.
Okay. Yes, because when you look at Beatty by itself, that does have some central students that
Okay.
need to.
Yeah, because, so its capacity is smaller. I think that's what I was trying to get at.
Of course, the worst performing school in our
Additional.
district is Huffman in the Southwest Quadrant. So those needs have gone unmet for years and years, and it's capacity that may or may not exist. So I'm not diminishing the need in the central. I mean, I want kids to have places everywhere, but for years and years and years, the Southwest Cluster has been ignored, and we need to not do that anymore.
Okay, when we look at the cost of option C, again, $90,000 per classroom times 8 classrooms is $720,000. Furniture, fixtures, about $20,000 per classroom. There was a study done at some point where one of the contractors cost estimated adding kitchens onto the 3 early childhood centers. Those are about $1.5 million each. That does not include a dining area. So Tony tells me when that analysis was done, the thought was they would use the activity room as the feeding room as well. And so I just want you to know that is not calculated into that number that was done. So if those will take more land space and they will cost more if we add on a separate dining area, just FYI. Construction cost
Pardon
is
me just
about...
a second. Teresa, I have a question for you, because we talked a little bit offline about feeding programs, and you talked about the fact that kids we know that are economically disadvantaged in our half day, do we have a legal imperative to feed them or a moral imperative to feed them?
Well, I mean, according to the Food, Nutrition, Lunch, and Federal Lunch Program, then we do have an obligation to feed them if we've identified them and we serve food. I think to me, it's not a compliance. I think it's a moral. If we are truly going to meet the needs of all of our students that are economically disadvantaged, we have the greatest control in serving our students the 7 to 8 hours that they're under our care, which means we can't control if parents are feeding them properly or not, but we can certainly control that when they are with us. And so potentially having students that are either coming to school hungry or leaving hungry, I think goes against our beliefs around wraparound services and providing students with what their needs are. And I've worked in 2 other districts, and feeding students, whether it's been a half day or a full day, has always been a part of the practice.
And so the fact that we now are feeding on campus because we have some full-day children, that causes maybe even the compliance requirement to feed, because we are feeding somebody on campus? Okay. And I would say, as a mother whose kids ate in their classroom for years because we didn't have cafeterias, that is not a great solution. Having little guys eat on floors that are not meant to eat on. I certainly, if we're going to look at this and feeding, I think we need to at least look at having places for them where they can eat that's not the activity room, because then you can't do other things that you're planning to do with families and parents.
Okay, so again, the top part is the same. Adding 8 additional classrooms, it's the 16:2 ratio would provide 128 additional seats, and that would be that would get us about 92% of target. The one-time costs are $6.75 million, and the ongoing is about $720,000 per year. Okay, now as we go to, I said we had two different options in D, and I'll let Susanna kick off option D1.
Okay, so the first option under D is looking at previous board documents. One of the options discussed for serving students in the 4th early childhood school was for it to be a full-day campus. So we have researched this and provided the cost for that model. This would be completely full day, and then like Mr. McDowell said, we have option D, which you'll see in a few slides. That's modeled after the early childhood schools. These ratios shown up here, the architect right now has at 19 classrooms. With these different ratios, we could provide from 304 to 418 spots at this campus. If full day were to be opened up to all students who are economically disadvantaged, we would naturally have some classrooms with lower ratios for students who would not be able to participate in full day in mainstream classrooms. So again, this is assuming that this is gen ed and full day only. This would create the need to change feeder boundaries if we did do a full day and not any specific special ed classrooms, because you may have students who would have to drive past early childhood school number 4 to go to Beatty to access some services there. An assumption of that full day would continue to be for economically disadvantaged only students.
Okay. Oh, you're on there. Okay, as we look at the cost of this option on full day, anytime that we open a new campus, we do have additional staffing and just ongoing cost. Again, this is inflated just because if you take 19 teachers or 19 classrooms times 90,000, that's 1.71 million of the total. That's 2.5 million. And so there's roughly about 800,000 that's going to be your ongoing cost. That includes utilities, custodial, landscape, property insurance, general maintenance, and copier rental. It's 295,000 of that number, and the rest is just the additional staff that it takes to run a pre-K campus. Okay, the other is really just a summary of that as well. The construction costs, the GMP number when it was bid out was approximately 17.5 million with some other costs. Furniture, fixtures, and equipment that were included in the bond were 1.2 million. And again, the total operating cost is just over 2.5 million per year, but 1.7 of that would be classroom teachers and teacher aides.
Randy, I think it's important to point out that any satellite classroom that you would move from an elementary campus to the new early childhood center would be a $90,000 offset. So for every satellite we moved in, depending on how many classrooms that turns out to be, you could start to subtract 90,000 per.
Because they're at that campus and
That's
they'll
right.
be co-located.
That's right. So they would relocate.
So that would reduce the 1.7
yes,
million number,
that's right.
correct?
Okay, to summarize, option D1, our full day early childhood school number 4. Again, like Randy said, we'd have, our target is 823. We need 275 more students to meet that planning target. If this is full day only, we would capture 304 to 418 seats, depending on ratios. The first one looks at if all of these are additional seats. In other words, everybody who is on an elementary campus were to stay on elementary, and these are brand new seats, we would meet and exceed our target between 113 to 126%. The costs are listed there: construction 17.5, plus FF&T of 1.2 million, and then the ongoing 2.54 million, assuming these are all brand new seats. If, to meet our target, we were only adding 275 new seats, and we would fill the remainder of early childhood school with students off of elementary campus, off satellite campuses, We would need 2 to 9 classrooms. That would give us a savings again in that $90,000 of $180 to $810,000 in staffing. And we would be at our target because we would have added just 275 new seats. And then the construction FF&T is the same, but the ongoing obviously is decreased from those staff members that we moved from satellite campuses. Okay, so the next model that we are showing here is if we were to build early childhood school similar to the other 3 that we have, and like elementary campuses, redistribute the feeders so that they are all similar models, and we can look into that. This is, we're making several assumptions here that they would have the same types of classrooms that the other, or the same quantity of different types of classrooms. So with 19 classrooms, we would probably need about 3 centralized special ed classrooms that goes up to a ratio of 6 for half day. 7 PPCD classrooms. The 4-year-olds can go up to 18 at half day, and the 3-year-olds are self-contained, so those go up to 10 students per half day. The totals are underneath, 144 for the 4-year-olds and 60 for the 3-year-olds. And then we have our 4 half-day general ed classrooms, which are 18 per half day for a total of 144. And then 6 full-day classrooms at 16 for the whole day, a total of 96. Now, we also have to assume that as we if this were to open up as an early childhood school model, we'll pull from the other early childhood schools, so it would create capacity at those as well.
Okay, so when we look at the cost of this option, the only differences are the couple of positions that are asterisked. And so we feel like we would have to add a diagnostician to be consistent with our other campuses, so that would add $64,000. And also, just because the additional students and their schedules and their needs, it would be adding an additional secretary as well. And so we project the total cost of this at $2,671,000. And again, it would have the same offset for any classes that are moved over.
So I just want to make sure that I'm understanding what I'm looking at. So in this particular scenario, is the assumption that we no longer have any satellite programs? That is not the assumption.
No, because even if these were all additional brand new, we would get to that 275, but we wouldn't be able to take off. We have currently, I believe it's 368 at our 11 elementary campuses.
Yeah, so I was looking at this going, well, how do you know that you're gonna, I mean, you have such variability of service here, you could not possibly take care of every.
No, we'd still have to keep some pre-K satellite campuses to be able to serve, to reach our planning target.
So the 480 is the new building. Is that what that is? The total seats 480. That's to build
at the early childhood school model. So if we modeled it, that's a combination of half and full day classrooms.
Okay.
If we did all full day, I believe it's 304 to 318, 304 to 418, depending on classroom.
And really what it summarizes to is when you open that 4th early childhood school, you can reduce some of the satellites, but to continue to grow the program, you still have to have some satellites in order to keep growing the program.
Okay.
Yeah. We'll max out.
Okay, so we previously looked at some of these slides early on. The current ESC feeder, the West, which is Beatty, is 33% economically disadvantaged, 15% mobility. The Central, which is Pearson, is 27% economically disadvantaged, 11% mobility. And the East, which is Isaacs, is 47% economically disadvantaged and 11% mobility. So this is just a draft of maybe one option, what it might look like if you carve out for early childhood school number 4. Under this, you can read those, but it's Then Beatty goes to 18% and 11%. Pearson goes to 43 and 13. Isaacs, 47 and 11, and ESC 4 at 49 and 17.
But actually, that's the community they're serving. The schools will almost all be economically disadvantaged because those are the only children that can be educated there. So the schools really won't be different in their makeup. Is that correct? It's just a community.
Well, I think what, or do you want to go ahead and address that? I mean, the percentages of economically disadvantaged came from each campus that's in that area.
That's right. So that's
their percentage. So this is student economically
That's right.
disadvantaged and student mobility.
Right, but that's the aggregate for that entire geography. But when you look at the children actually sitting in the early childhood schools, they're almost all economically disadvantaged. So there's not a distinction between the four schools in that regard. Is that
No,
correct?
there are special ed students in those schools.
Right, but
In
when
the
you look at
in the EC, in the early childhood schools, there's a lot of sped.
right, but for anyone who's attending a full day program, it's because they're economically
Yes.
disadvantaged.
Mhm.
So it's not like the true disparities where you have Skaggs with almost no economically disadvantaged and Mitchell with a lot. In those schools, all those children attending full day will have a similar background.
Okay, so on the next slide, it just takes the same information, but it looks, here we go. And so if we look at how many students do we need in each one of these feeders to meet our target, we have 100, so the total of all these add up to 707, and that's because it excludes the Head Start students. It excludes the 114 Head Start students. And so in the Beatty, it's 154. We currently have 5 full-day classrooms, and we need 5 more in order to meet, to accommodate the 154 students. In Pearson, it would be 138. We currently have 7 full-day and would need 2 more full-day. In the Eastern, which is Isaacs, we would need to serve 229. We currently have 10 full-day, and we would need 5 more full-day. And in ESC 4, it would be 186, and we currently have 10 full-day, and we would need 2 more full-day.
Randy, is that in the board book? I don't see that level of detail.
It's not.
down.
Was this one added today?
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's not in ours.
I want to study that one for a minute.
Yes, please.
Is it up there? Are the points that you mentioned the bulleted points?
They are. You can see a
Because I-
small line going over to each one of them.
Because the picture's the same.
The picture's the same, it's just the caption.
Yeah, it's the same exact map. We just added the total number of full-day classrooms we need to hit the target based on this attendance boundary map.
So the blue is +5, the green is
It
plus.
needs 2 plus 2.
Two.
The east is +5.
Plus-
And the purple at the bottom on ECS 4 would be 2.
So based on our need and based on where we have capacity to expand, this is how many more
You would expand.
seats, how many more classrooms we would need by each area to increase the seats to meet that target, the 70% planning target.
Hopefully this will be sent to us.
We will. We apologize. We thought it was important information.
So in some ways, this map doesn't represent the big need in the central. It's only saying adding 2 more classrooms, so I'm a little puzzled.
Well, it's the boundaries are a lot different. I'm very interested in that school number 4 demographics and change, and very interested in knowing of that economically disadvantaged, what percentage of that is Vines feeder pattern part of that, and what is the true Southwest, because I think that, or the West feeding, Shepton feeding piece. I think that breakdown would be interesting. I would have expected it to be that it would be as the Southwest goes, that the ED would be where that is. But based on the other chart we have, I'm curious if that's really the case. Because it looks like, I'd like to know what the real numbers are, please.
You know, actually, I hate to even ask this, but I mean, to me, what would be most instructive would be to see a campus a map of the entire district with all of the campuses identified and where the space is and where the need is, all the way down to the elementary boundary level. Because then you can see some concentric circles beginning to, there I think you can see where the need is. Where, for example, on this map, the purple section needs 5 classrooms and the central up at the top needs 2. Well, how many of those 5 from the purple are actually on the eastern boundary of that, which would theoretically be in the same central corridor? Because when I look at this chart, you can, when you put this in a graph and you can see where we have room to expand school programs and where the needs are, I think you'll see visually where we need to expand. Am I? I mean,
That makes sense.
I think
Just
you're right.
once
It's
again, to
very
be the
true.
broken record, take into consideration, you've got some widely varying capacities in that, wherever there are apartments. And there are 27,000 apartments that feed into the Shepherd feeder pattern. A bit to answer the question about Sigler and Weatherford. Weatherford is 60% low SES. Jackson down in the true Southwest is 68%. Huffman is 71%. Sigler is 79%. So you certainly got a number of schools in the Southwest quadrant that have low SES that rival anything in the district. With high mobility. Yeah, that was something interesting. I guess Huffman was 23%. So 23% of the kids are not in the classroom 5 of the 6 grading periods. At least, 5 of the 6 grading periods. A quarter of the kids are turning over every year there, in the middle of the school year.
Second resolution.
So David, what I think you're suggesting is a pictorial image of supply and demand.
Yeah.
So, regardless of
Like,
feeder patterns.
yeah, take feeder
Just
patterns out of it altogether,
Just,
and let's see what the supply and
picture of
demand
this.
looks like.
But you know, you have to bear in mind the feeder patterns also correlate to the siblings. So that's a consideration because a family doesn't want their kids going to so many
but I
different
think he's just trying to get an image,
Okay.
a geographical
Yeah, I mean,
understanding of supply and demand and how it looks.
yeah,
how it
look,
lays
for
out.
example, take, Weatherford and Jackson. They're right across the street from one another, but they go to 2 different feeder patterns, or part of the kids go to 2 different feeder patterns. And so looking at feeder patterns doesn't really give you much information as opposed to seeing what the supply and demand is for that community that encompasses both of those neighborhoods. And if that's more instructive.
I think it would be, because if you'd see Skaggs and Andrews and Wyatt up in the north and realize they may have room, but they're not close to really any kids with need.
I agree, yeah. I was actually gonna get Sharon to print me off a map. I was gonna do it while we're sitting here, but it'd be better if y'all.
Go after that, Sharon.
David, I've got one, you want it?
Unfold it.
Yeah. I was actually gonna ask y'all to bring in a map, and I thought you would just think I was completely crazy, but that's exactly what we need.
No, we think you're crazy, just not for that.
We all have
I'm
maps with
passionately
sticky
crazy about
notes.
helping all these kids.
We have maps with sticky notes. and
Well,
this will help them.
especially since our ESCSs are not following the feeder pattern. So we need to be looking at
Yeah,
it from
I
the
mean-
whole, because we may find that we need to have an ECS in a different place than what we're I don't know. I mean, we don't know what we're going to find until we see that picture.
I mean, just looking at the central on here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of those schools, you're going to 8.
Yeah, that's why we added that column.
Yeah.
Because it's disruptive.
Right.
As we do this map analysis, and I'm really excited by that, please, in those apartment complexes, I would love to see how many kids they produce for us at kindergarten over the last 5 years, so we can just see how they go up and down and up and down. No, it's very critical to this conversation, because don't count on capacity in the Southwest Quadrant when in the space of 1 year, it could completely evaporate on you.
But you don't want a separate report of that?
Well, I think
You want it on that map?
it needs to be part of this map analysis, because if you do the analysis, you come back and say, oh, right now there are 200 spots at Huffman. Well,
Right.
that's this year.
Mhm.
And that's also not taking into consideration, you know, the IB program.
Mhm.
Mitchell's enrollment has varied by 200 over the last 2 years. Crazy.
And Tammy, I'm not, we may have to get together after the meeting, but, so are you saying tie those to births?
No, I don't think births have anything to do with
Okay.
it. That's why I even questioned that we were basing our kindergarten numbers on births in the zip code. When the kids who live in the apartments are there 1, 2, 3 years, they're not born there. They're not like families like mine that my kids were born in this zip code. And so I really just would like to see the enrollment of kindergarten children in our feeders from the apartment, so we can see how they vary from year to year to year.
And the trends from just like the trend of birth rate.
Exactly.
From any apartment.
Any apartment, but you have 27,000 of them. More than half of the apartments in Plano ISD are in the Shepton feeder pattern.
And they reside in the city of Dallas.
A lot of them.
Yeah.
And sorry, let me clarify something real quick. I don't know, I'm supposed to be pointing at. To regress back here just for a minute, on the birth rate, the purpose in this isn't, it's just a check to be sure that, so kindergarten enrollment, to see if it's trending up or down, the only real way to know are we staying close is to look, the only gauge we've got on kindergarten, which we're using for pre-K, we're backing it up a year because we don't project pre-K, is just seeing how are we doing on a trend of if we compare that to zip code births. And so here, when you look back over a 7-year, I believe there's 7 years there from 17, 18 back, so it goes back to births in 2006. The demographer pulls the births that are within our zip code, and then he compares that to 5 years later, the kindergarten. And then he carries out that same number, so you can see it was running around 90% or low 90s. It tapered up there in 17, 18, that it was actually 94% of the births in the county actually became the kindergarten class. It's not the same students, but just trying to come up with some trend analysis. And the births, you can see our kindergarten enrollment has gone down pretty significantly, as have our zip code births. So this is used just as a check on what are we projecting in kindergarten, because after that point in time, the demographer grows them by a grade level.
But Randy, that's really less important to me in this discussion. What's more important is how we're filling the capacity of those schools along the tollway. And so since those schools are filled to different levels based on what's happening in the apartments, rents going up, rents going down, that impacts this discussion about where we have room. And so when you can see them swinging by 50 to 100 to 200 in a given year, that's what we need to understand. Because the analysis may be, we look at the variability and decide we can't count on using that capacity because of how we've seen it go up and down just over our own 5-year history. I'm going to look at once again at Huffman, because I know those numbers the best. At one point, that school was up to 725 kids in a school that's supposed to hold less than 600. And that's because there had been changes in how many kids were coming out of the apartments. So that's what I really worry about. We're going to count on capacity that's not going to be there if some apartment complex changes the rent.
And Huffman peaked at 544 apartment students in 14, 15. Every other year's been at under 500.
Yeah, but there used to be 350 neighborhood kids who came to Huffman not that long ago. only 4 years ago, there were 200 neighborhood kids coming to Huffman. Right now, there are 100 living in that area. Half of them don't come to Huffman. So there are kids there that we've actually forced out. When we look at ADA and worrying about losing students, we forced out almost 100 children out of our own school zone because we're not providing the educational service that they need. So they either transfer out or they go to Trinity Christian, Prestonwood, Prince of Peace. So the need's there. They just don't come and get it from us.
Some of that attrition is for parents like you and me who haven't left the district, so there is some normal just aging of the neighborhood.
There's no other neighborhood in Plano that has the low yield that the old Shepherd Place neighborhood has. No neighborhood the same age that has that low a yield. It's less than 4%. And these are all numbers that Richard Matkin had provided over the years. I've got them all, and I'm sure y'all have them as well. So there's another neighborhood that I'm familiar with, Houston. It's where we started elementary. Even that neighborhood, which is older than mine, produces, I think, almost a 7 or 8% yield. So it's not the age of the neighborhood.
So let's circle back.
Okay.
To the last option that we were talking about.
Yes, to summarize, option D2, building early childhood school number 4 as an early childhood school model. Again, those top numbers are repeated. 823 is our target. If we were to do option D as the early childhood school model with 19 classrooms, that's approximately 480 seats, 96 of them being for full day and 384 of those being for half day seats. We would be at 88% of our target, which, 88% at the costs below, 17.5 million construction, FF&T at 1.2 million, and ongoing of 2.67 million.
Okay, so in summary, when we look at these options, and again, you can take none, you can take any combination thereof. So option A would add somewhere between 64 and 192 seats. The only cost would be furniture, and it could meet our target 84 to 99%. Option B, adding additional classrooms. If we added 18, it could add 288 to 396 seats, depending on class size. $20,000 per classroom, and $40,000 for every campus that doesn't currently have a pre-K, $90,000 per classroom for additional staff, and possible restroom renovations, and that would meet 111%, up to 111% of our target. Option C, adding on to the early childhood centers, could, by adding 8 additional classrooms, would add 128 to 176 seats. The initial startup costs are included, they'd be included in the bond funding. The classroom cost is $90,000 per classroom for staff. Both of these options would have additional transportation costs. Existing elementaries we figure would have a lower transportation cost than busing to a satellite or early childhood school. Construction bond costs, $6.75 million. For the 3 kitchens, and then also $250,000 per classroom. It gets us up to that 6.75, and our percentage of target would be 92 to 97%. Building early childhood center 4 under option D1, if they were all full day pre-K, would add 304 to 418 seats. The initial startup cost would be included in the bond. Estimated annual operating about $2.5 million, but again, about 1.7 of that is classroom staff. There would be additional transportation cost. You can see the bond cost there, and that it would meet about 113 to 126% of the target of 70%. Option 2, if we build early childhood 4 and model it like similar to our other 3 early childhood schools, would increase about 480 seats. 96 of those would be full day if we kept the same configuration. The startup costs are included in the bond. The annual costs are about $2.67 million plus transportation cost, and the construction costs would be covered with the bond, and that would meet about 88% of the target.
So Randy, again, I'll go back to the comment. As you depart from a student to teacher ratio of 16 to 2 all the way to 22, I think for each one of them, you need to incorporate option A as well, because if you're going to have 18, 20, or 22 in the new classrooms, you probably want to have them in the existing classrooms as well.
That's correct. I agree with that. If you change class size, you'd add 8 of whichever other option you look
Right.
at.
To the point, though, that I would be gravely concerned about us going to 22.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think that's just not an option in my book. 20 is pushing it. But I mean, if it's a matter of, I'd rather just not have to look at that. But 16 is we've got some room. And certainly for this year, if we've got kids on a waiting list now, I would encourage us to look at how we can change those ratios to service our kids immediately as we can.
My point is just that if, and I'm not arguing whether 22 is a number off the chart, but whatever number it is, that applies to existing classrooms as well. So those are two separate decisions. The first one is what's acceptable. If 22 is not acceptable, is 20 acceptable? Is 18 acceptable? Whatever those numbers are, the other classrooms per option A need to incorporate too.
Yeah, I would agree with Yorm. I think the first order of business in terms of an analysis from this group would be to determine what's the acceptable under A, and then you incorporate that into the rest of the other options in terms of how we move forward.
That makes our life easier.
Are there any limitations in terms of square foot? I mean, square foot requirements for 18 children versus 22 children?
I would have to double check, but no, there's, so the state guidelines are just on a classroom. They don't say you can build it smaller if it only has 16. Existing classrooms are grandfathered for whatever the requirements were whenever they were built, and so you don't have to go back and retrofit, or you don't have to adjust those. But the state assumes, the 22-to-1 in K through 4, and so the state guidelines now, if you build an elementary school, fall under that guideline.
I thought we had retrofitted all the buildings to the modern guidelines. Is that not correct? Isn't that why
I'm
we
sorry,
did all
I can't, I'm not sure on that.
I think we have.
I think we have.
Yeah.
Okay. I just
And
would
Ted,
want
you
to.
remember, we're talking about pre-K students, they're barely half a square foot each.
They have big auras, they have high
round
energy. Yes, like little atoms when it's hot. So no, I think it's important to make sure that we don't end up, squeezing the wrong, just make sure we've got enough square footage. And then that would also apply to just the building in general. If you're going to increase the capacity of the building by basically anywhere from 2 to 5%, how's that going to look at everything else the building's having to support, the library, the hallways, the parking lot, whatever else?
Do you know?
Go ahead, Susanna.
No, there is, I don't know the number right now, I don't have it with me, but there is a amount of square footage per child in pre-K, so I will get that number to you.
Okay. I had a question. Oh, can I go ahead? On option D, you've got the full day or the early childhood model. And with the full day, was that going to affect more realignment of the feeder patterns to get that to work? And so maybe more transportation cost on that one?
Yeah.
Okay.
Which one?
The full day,
D1.
option D.
But just as a question, if we're not needing more capacity for our special education or the PPCD, why would we want to add that type of capacity to our system? I mean, full day is what we seem to have a need for.
Because, go ahead. Yes, Susanna.
The only concern, you're right, we probably, I hope to believe that we're serving all of the special ed students that are out there. The only concern that I would have in not making it the early childhood school model is that with it being full day only, and if you saw the feeder there, what ends up happening with Beatty Early Childhood School is that it turns into very low economically disadvantaged numbers, and that creates a difficult situation for least restrictive environment. It ends up being basically a self-contained campus. And that we need typical peers to continue to maintain that legal least restrictive environment by IDEA. So removing that large percentage of economically disadvantaged from Beatty will create a problem at Beatty as well.
But right now it has 4 full-day classrooms of economically disadvantaged children?
At Beatty, there's 3.
3.
Mhm.
And so, I still struggle with the idea that we would deny service to a kid who needs full day because he's ED, because we have to work on a balance. Understand why, but that's still a disturbing idea, that we'd say you can't have full day.
Tonight I listened very carefully to all of our presentation from speakers, and all three of my children went to Isaac's Early Childhood School, and I love that school. And I'm quite aware that we provide quality pre-K services. So when I'm listening to all of this and I'm comparing everything that everybody's presenting, what I see is that as a first step, why don't we consider option 1A as a first step, Because the thing is that we do have quality in our classrooms. And so even if we move it from 18 to 18 students per class, we still have quality teachers in those classrooms. It's something to consider. Just for now. And then, and then we can define where we should, have that next building for when we need it. Where's the most need is location. Something to consider.
It makes sense to have a blend of whatever we consider all the best ideas. I think certainly I'd like to make sure we've got the right square footage, and then I think even going to 18 to 2, if I'm reading this right, it gives us 64 seats, but that's still, I think, not the full number that we need.
So I think this concludes this part of the presentation, and now I think Sarah's going to pick up to kind of get some. We've kind of started this part, I think, already, giving some,
We're
some
kind of
feedback.
circling the wagon back around, and I'm calling this the magic slide because it is the last one. It is slide number 43. And so I want to kind of take us back to where we started, and that is with the charge to expand full-day pre-K for economically disadvantaged students. And so I hope that through the course of this presentation, you'll have been able to have a clearer understanding of how that expansion has occurred over the past 3 years and where that expansion has occurred and how we've accomplished the expansion in full day, but also even in half-day growth. I have some questions on the slide just for pondering, and it's late, so, and I know we're going to bring back some items to the board. So we'll kind of take your guidance on how much time or thought you want to put into discussing any of these questions. But from an administrative standpoint, what is our continued commitment to pre-K full day? I stated from the very beginning what I feel like administration's feeling about pre-K for our students is. Half day is excellent, and full day for those who need it is also excellent. And so, we want them, however we can get them, to the maximum amount that they have the choice available in front of them that meets their needs. And so if I'm a parent and full day is the way I can access pre-K, then I want to have enough of it.
Right.
If I'm a parent that says I only want to send my child half day and I'm going to have my kid with me the other half day, then I want that for that parent as well. Because the kindergarten ready piece, both programs are getting our kids kindergarten ready. So I want to have enough of both that we are accommodating all parent choice and parent need. And I think that's important to remember. I think there might be some seats in half day that we could convert to full day if we're careful about it, so that we're not creating wait lists. But I also think, what are your thoughts around half day, full day? What about the options that we've considered, blending options, or, now it looks like there's some other homework for us to go back and kind of take another round through to bring back to you. So I'll kind of turn it over to y'all now to have some conversation and thoughts on direction for us so that we can listen carefully and keep this moving.
Well, I might jump in the pool real quick. You know me and what I always think of. First off, this whole conversation needs to be heard by our legislators. And we need to get support for what we're trying to deliver that's the best for our students. And full day pre-K, to me, is an option that I don't want to have a wait list for. I agree with you, David. And I also think our state legislators need to know the dilemma we're in and the powerful payback we get in results with early childhood attendance full day. And then also our Head Start program. We need federal expansion of that so that we can offer more seats. We have a wait list on Head Start. So that's my first comment, but I always start out with legislative. But I really do support the full day pre-K to the extent we can with the most cost-effective way to deliver it with the highest quality.
I fully support pre-K. I like the idea of options, giving our parents options. I would like to have as many kids in full day as possible, but if half day is a better option,
Sure.
you know, I think that we would want to be able to provide that. And I'll even go a step further and say that when we get this figured out for our economically disadvantaged students, I'd like to look at tuition-based programs for all students. And so if we've got some campuses that have capacity, this is probably not a this year project, but certainly if we have capacity on campuses where we could offer tuition-based full-day pre-K, knowing that we're providing a better quality pre-K than those parents who are sending their kid to pre-K at the local daycare, let's take a look at that.
I support full-day pre-K, especially for economical disadvantage, because, well, you know why. That's if it's not feasible for them to do half-day, then what's the alternative? So I'm supportive of that. I think that we need to satisfy the need, whatever the need is. I think we need to know what the need is and where the need is. The third thing I think is we need to pragmatically look into the future, the demographic projections, and kind of be pragmatic, take into consideration the fluctuations in certain areas, be ready for everything, but at the same time remember that we're not growing. So let's make sure that we don't build something, whatever we build, that stays empty because there's no need. And I want us to do it in the most cost-effective way, not sacrificing quality.
I really like the idea of having parents have options. I think that's really, really important. I would even wonder, to your dilemma with special ed students, if there's a possibility if parents wanted their children to be in a full-day special ed program, that we could have that to be tuition-based so that half-day is, you know, just to help with those numbers. Because I get the more full-day we have, the harder it's going to be provide to accommodate our special ed students to have the environment that they need to be. So provide those options as well so that we can maybe accommodate families and students that way.
And I actually support full day preschool and also options for parents to choose between full day and half day. And I agree with Jerry that our SPED families should have the options too. And so this is a great opportunity for us to open up more options for our parents. So we definitely need to do more research on this.
Well, you all know where I come down on this. I think
You're the only one against it.
I served on the board of Head Start of Greater Dallas for 9 years. They serve 4,000 low-income children. I mean, I have lived and breathed this. I served on the boards of 2 pre-Ks that my kids attended. So this is a passion for me. So I think we should consider 70% a floor, not a ceiling, in terms of trying to encourage children to partake. As a working mother, half day would have never worked for me. I couldn't have taken advantage of that. And it shows families that, like I said earlier, we think that Hispanic families only want half day. That's not what the numbers are telling us at Memorial or Mendenhall. So let's not use that as an excuse. I'm open to exploring a variety of options. I want to make sure we don't explore any options that compromise the quality. If you have a classroom that 18 to 2 works for those kids, fine. As Susanna indicated, there were some situations where it took 16 to 2 to actually have a healthy learning environment.
Right.
And so we need to be really careful we don't jump to a solution that may not produce the same quality. So that can be one of the solutions, but not the only. We need to look hard at where the capacity really is. I mean, it's to send a little kid from Mitchell up to Skaggs or Andrews, it's just not viable. And so let's please not even think that. They're West feeder, but they're worlds apart in so many different ways, so we have to ensure that. I also want to make sure that this is a case where we're not talking about equity, we're talking about equal. If you have these services, whatever they are, at a pre-K on an early childhood school, they should have the same services if we're going to use satellite, and that has not been the case. So we need to look hard at that. This is one where equal needs to be equal because they're all economically disadvantaged kids. So to me, there's no compromise on that. I know it's part of the next discussion looking about wraparound, but you can't have all the services in the east side and have nothing. I was on Mitchell's campus last week with Teresa. She was a very gracious host and met the principal there for the first time. I could have hugged his neck because he said completely unaided. I was just talking to one of the staff, one of the administrative members here, and said, we need services for our families that are closer. I said, I don't even know you, I love you. And so, I mean, the need is out there. And we need to look hard at these capacities. Let's not build a structure, a strategy where it could disappear on you, the capacity, in a year. And so that is the biggest issue we have down there. That's where all the apartments are. That's where you swing so dramatically. So if you're going to count on Mitchell to have 2 and Rosemary Hager to have 2, Huffman to have 2, and they don't, then what do you do? And as Nancy alluded to earlier, we need some guiding principles. If we're going to go into these satellite programs as part of our strategy, we can't swing with the wind, swing with what's convenient.
Well, I think one of your guiding principles could be that barrier or concentric circle that you won't go past with a 4-year-old.
Right, so it's multi-part. It's
Right.
having no fewer than 2 pre-K classrooms on a campus. It's
Right.
not making a kid be on a bus for 14 miles in 40 minutes.
Right.
We need to have some guidance, and equal needs to be equal. If they have a family liaison, they all need to have a family liaison. And it needs to be a ratio that's somewhat similar, because if you have half a social worker serving 450 kids, that's basically 3 times the load that the parent liaison or social worker at the early childhood schools have. That's not equal either. How will those little children ever get service when it's 3 to 1? So those are my hopes.
So as you've all been talking, I've been making a list of some things that I'm hearing you say and a list of to-dos. So I know you've done the same thing, Sarah, so I just kind of want to make sure that you've captured what I think I've heard. So I'll start with the to-dos first. If you'll come back to the board with this graphic of supply and demand. So take a look at all of the campuses and, just take a big map and show us this one chart of information, the supply and demand, for, I'll call that practical planning purposes. Number 2, figure out what you recommend the ratio to be in option 1 and apply that to all of the options across the board. So that's sort of the common, I don't know what it ought to be. I think you've heard what it ought not be on the upper end from a support point of view, but maybe from your expertise, what would you recommend? If you'll get back to us on the square footage per pre-K student to let us know if we're...
Okay, it's 36 square feet per student on a new facility, which is 800. So that's and that's, like I said, that's on a new facility.
Okay.
That's the same for a pre-K, K, or first grade class.
So can you check to make sure that we're okay in our current facilities? The ones that you're looking at as optional, are we okay in that department? Do we have 800 square feet?
Yes, we
Or whatever we need. So you check that for us. That's my list of to-dos, outside of Nancy's suggestion about the legislative conversation. Then on the principles, the variety of things that you've said about value statements, about this particular program, I think I've heard everybody say they value pre-K programming and growing full day as much as possible. So along those lines, I heard no wait list for half day or full day, please. So what can be done with that? So that's just a value statement. Is there any value in order to accommodate that, what is your solution? Can, like now, can we send them to a nearby school? Do you increase capacity, ratio at present? No pre-K teacher is alone at a campus. So no single standing classroom without a teacher not having a colleague. allowing for a principle that allows for capacity variability. So that's the point that you're making, that you don't want to plan on something and then find out that you shouldn't have planned on that. So some principle about that. I've heard choice being valued, giving parents options, whether it's full day or half day, and I've heard having a tuition programming option on the campus, for full day, where that's, not going to bump us up against the half day, IDEA requirements. And I heard SPED options, so for families that can, have access to maybe some new services. I heard about travel time, a criteria.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe there are others that say we will not in our program delivery go beyond,
Right.
This is what's reasonable, however you want to define it. Travel's just a variable that I heard. Value maximizing participation in half and or full day. Making sure that the programming is always of high quality. In having equal service available to all in need. That's what I think I heard everybody say. And I didn't hear anybody disagree with any of those things.
I agree.
So if you could frame up some guiding principles, with this in mind, and you may have some others that you've collected that I didn't say that, you think are worth incorporating. So I think there's more discussion, a little bit more discussion to have around this.
I have one other to do, if I could add. I know that a year or so ago, there was a meeting with stakeholders, a committee meeting, and I know Brian was there with the City of Dallas, apartment owners, district members, and I'd like to see a state representative there. But get those heads together in a room again, because I think part of that market variability that Tammy's referring to that creates the mobility issue could be negotiated in that kind of a meeting and get an understanding where the apartment owners are in that quadrant, the southwest quadrant. And I think we had a pretty meaningful meeting a year and a half ago with that group. And I think it would be wise to have the similar heads together in a room again. Actually, I was at that meeting, and so was Susan. I was very disappointed with the small number of apartment owners who actually sent a representative. I think there were only 2, and it was interesting. I think it was the Champions apartment, which has 70 vouchers. So it's the highest concentration of poverty. It's the children with the highest needs. The manager of that apartment said, when the kids get home, tell them to go directly to their apartments. We don't want them out on the grounds. So even in the place where they lived and their parents paid rent, they don't want them out on the grounds because then they're an issue to deal with. That's the support we're getting from the apartments. And the city council person in that area also basically said, I don't think about those people. So that's the support. So
Dallas City Council or Plano City?
Dallas, because that's the city of Dallas.
This is
down
city
there.
of Dallas, that's
So
right.
if it's going to get done, we are going to do it.
Well, I think there's a potential communication that we can have there that would be beneficial.
So I'm thinking, just given what I'm hearing, there might be some things we could do soon with regard to ratios, and there might be some things for planning purposes that might take, more thought to implement. But there might be an immediate impact available.
Missy, I had one more guiding principle that I'd sort of walked around a little bit, and that's the idea that we don't want to take away capacity for K through 5 at our schools because we're accommodating full day. And that gets back to if there's a family that lives there, either apartment or home, K-5, they need to get to go to that school. And also specifically with Huffman issue, you want to make sure there's sufficient room to bring people from throughout the district to Huffman to help first take advantage of the investment we're doing in IB, and second, make that a functioning, thriving school again.
Can I add one more thing? When we talk about a graphic representation of the supply and demand in each of the campuses, I think as we start considering the different options, it would be interesting to see how that would change with the different options, because the different options are geographically tied as well. And so if we grow the number, the ratios in classrooms, if we grow the number of classrooms, we build more classrooms, any of one of those options, I think it would make sense, especially after we narrow down that, 22 is not acceptable, 16 we're maybe on the low end, so maybe we're somewhere between 18 and 20. Once we do that, it will narrow down the options, but then to just look at what would supply and demand look after we implemented those. And especially when we look at it geographically and we see how far do they need to go under the different options.
Okay. All right, do you have enough information from us at this point in time?
May I ask
Can we have it
before?
tomorrow?
I just want to say great thanks. This document that you all put together really did help to provide good information. I know that it was very time consuming, but it was very helpful to be able to see all the different options and the variance of those options. The other thing I'm very pleased to see is it clearly was a team effort and that many people came to the table to put this information together, and that's noted and it is greatly appreciated.
I know that you guys have probably literally spent, I think, hundreds of hours working on this. All of you have. And I know this has kept you from probably doing some of your other job as we've gotten to the beginning of school. I'm hopeful that as a board we can support the staff by letting them get back to their work. We'll just wrap up the last bit of this and get some more information back and get some clarity around direction. Give them some high level agreement on guiding principles, and then let them go to work to implement that, and then do the business of continuing to run the district, so that I know they've got the plan of work to do, and so forth. So thank you very much. Thank you, Sarah, Teresa, all of you. I know all of you have contributed to this, and it's high quality and very comprehensive and informative.
So Missy, what's the next step timeline?
I think I would let Sarah determine that.
If you'll let me go back to the team and talk about how long it'll take us to kind of realistically put these pieces together. And then, I know we have a board meeting on September 4th, the day after Labor Day. I don't know that we will have this ready by then, but certainly, I'm thinking, I'll talk to the team, but I would think we can do these next steps in not too long of a period of time. I mean, we're already in the work, so I think pulling this together shouldn't take that much longer to do. So, let me talk to the team, and we'll try. We'll get it done, and we won't dilly-dally.
It's fresh in our brain right now.
I think as an immediate request, I would say if by the 4th we could get a ratio number recommendation.
Yeah.
If we could do that by the 4th, because that is something that we could implement immediately
I think we can
clear up those
we'll
lists.
Look at the wait list. We'll
Yeah.
look at there's things on there that we want to do, quickly.
Right. So if you'll let us know, like in our next update about the wait list story,
okay.
that would be
Yeah.
helpful. Okay. Thank you all. If there's no further business before the board, the meeting will be adjourned, and the time is 9:47 p.m.